CD 4.
Dimple clenched and unclenched his fists. This might be a game, but he couldn't treat it like one. You've got to understand. If you're planning to leave me, it changes everything. If I knew you were leaving, I would be forced to find out if Wally was genuine and then seriously consider what he was putting on the table. And if the drought breaks this time next year, it wouldn't be fair to you for me to say, "I'm out, give me my share of the farm." Wow. Dimple's mouth stayed open as he watched his wife walk over to a stall displaying dresses on coat hangers in a line down one side. She began flipping through them, occasionally pulling one part way out to admire it, then putting it back. He turned and strode back down the street the way they had come. When he got to the bottom of the rise, he crossed the street and walked back to the top. Then he crossed the street and walked to the bottom of the hill again, and returned. Then he did it again. He did not want to sell his farm. He did not want Wally Oliver to own it. Double the price would never be enough. But his management brain, the part of his brain that forced him to make hard farm decisions, practical decisions, was telling him that Ruthie was right. They couldn't afford to ignore an offer like this, if it was real. He stood back and watched Ruthie find her way around the stalls. He took his phone out of his pocket and took a deep breath. If he didn't call back now, the offer would probably disappear. And if he did call, he would be giving Wally whatever twisted satisfaction he desired. But the positive outweighed the negative. Only pride was in the way. He dialed. "Hi. Dimple Travers. Were you serious just now? Double market value?" "Of course I was. I wouldn't ring you just for the joke," Wally answered like a trusted old friend. "Why would you make the offer?" "We're always seeking to buy good country. Scotty said you have a nice place that is well set up and that you seem to have done well on. I could see you're an honest couple, which means there wouldn't be any surprises if we bought the place." "Surprises?" "You know, telling me a creek is permanent and me finding it's not permanent when the big droughts are on. Exaggerating the carrying capacity of the place, falsifying crop history and yields, and so on." Dimple wanted to ask him if this sort of thing really happened, but he knew he needed to avoid casual chat. "What makes you think we want to sell?" "I didn't think you wanted to sell, but times are tough. The future might be a little rough. Who wouldn't sell at the right price?" It was something Dimple joked about with his mates. When mining companies and overseas investors offered inflated prices, the question they asked was, "How much would it take to get you to leave?" The answer varied, depending on the mood his mates were in and how the season was progressing. Sometimes they said, "Whatever they offer, I'd be out of here." But they never meant it. Dimple explained that he had rung back because Wally's offer had taken him by surprise. He hadn't meant to be rude. "We might even be interested," he said. "Just not right at this minute." "The offer stands, and will for a while. So give me a call when you're ready. Bye." When he got back to the market, Ruthie was waving him over to look at something she had found, as if there was nothing unusual in their world. He had the sensation that he was dreaming his existence. A phone call from the devil making an offer he might not be able to refuse. A fun, friendly trip to a market and a dam with a woman who might be leaving him. But what was the alternative? Nothing he could think of doing changed anything. If he screamed at Ruthie in a rage at her duplicity, it would not change her mind. If he hadn't talked to Wally, it would only have narrowed his options. Tomorrow, Dimple would be feeding cattle and checking weather forecasts. Nothing would change that for the better either. He strolled across the grass to his happy-faced wife. "What do you think of this?" She held a brightly coloured top up against herself. "Pretty, isn't it?" "Yes, it is. I like it." He thought he probably did like it. but he wasn't very good at judging these things. And besides, his opinion wouldn't matter either way. It was just part of a female ritual, asking for an answer, but only listening to the right response, whatever that was. "I think I'll get it. It's only $49. "Sounds like a deal." "Who was on the phone?" "I rang Wally back to keep the offer open." "Did you really?" She appeared bemused. "I didn't have a choice." "Yes, you did." "Not a responsible one." Ruthie didn't reply, just examined the top for longer than was needed. Then she asked, "He was all right with it?" "Yep. Calm as." Well done, I suppose. I might just kick you out first the way we're going." "You didn't want to kick me out of the motel room last night." She sniggered cheekily, adding to his suspicion of being in a dream. But while there was a drought, she was his. That's what he would hang on to. He put a hand on the small of her back possessively and followed her to the stall holder who held out a card machine. Ruthie paid for the top, and they moved to the next stalls. Dimple thought someone looking on might have thought they were newly happily together. And they were happy. He was sure of it, if only for this day. When they were back on the road, Ruthie said, "I enjoyed that. Fancy there being a nice little market like that in the middle of nowhere when we just happened to be passing through." After a moment's satisfaction, she consulted the GPS on her phone. "I'll tell you where to turn." Dimple was thinking again about Wally Oliver. His father had been a driven prick, but maybe nothing more than that. But Wally gave off a sense of corrupted power. He might never have known anything except wealth and influence. It was probably whispered in his ear from an early age, "You are special. You are better than others." And what about those Asian women? Were they just normal staff? Backpackers? Concubines while his wife was away? How could he tell if a man like that was making a serious offer? How could he make sense of anything that man did? Dimple would ring a real estate agency from the area and ask them what they thought about it and how Wally usually operated. A plan always made him feel better. He let himself relax into the driving. Of course there would be no need to ring anyone. When they got home, Ruthie would return to her committed self. She would be worrying about the animals, the garden, her sons, and the well-being of her friends, the things that kept her anchored. All this was like a holiday romance, so important and life-changing until you got home and realized it was none of those things. "Take the next left," Ruthie said. It should say Bark Haven. Chapter 7. There were low hills all around them now, and from the top of a rise they saw water, the first part of a scribbly-edged lake. Ruthie pointed. It wasn't beautiful, but at least it was a big body of water. Both of them had wondered if the drought might have reduced it to pools and muddy flats. They entered the lake holiday area through a security gate with a boom and followed a track down to a reception area and office. They both went inside, where a short, spindly woman sat behind and below a long counter with a thick, ancient computer in front of her and paper files all around. She lifted her head, put on a professional smile, and asked how she could help them. Ruthie noticed she had the name Alyssa on a badge on her chest. "We were wanting to stay a night, in a cabin, a powered cabin." "Sure, we've got plenty available. There's only 2 other cabins occupied tonight." The woman looked at a board of hanging keys and selected one. "How about number 14? It's closest to the water and away from the car park. If you follow the road past this office, it's like the middle one in the front row. $80, thanks. There's an ablutions block up behind the cabins." She passed the key, and Dimple reached out to take it and gave her some cash. "Do you have barbecues we can use?" "Yes, there are 3 down here to my left," she pointed. "They're standalone units with a roof and seats. You'll see them as you go past." "Great. Thanks." You need to be out by 9 in the morning, unless you want to pay extra. No, 9 o'clock will be okay, thanks. Ruthie said this because she knew Dimple would be restless by the morning and ready to go home, no doubt pacing by 7 a.m. They drove slowly down the road as directed. There were 15 pine cabins, small rectangular boxes that looked like they could hold a double bed and nothing more. The grass in between the cabins had given up struggling. The water's edge was obviously further from the cabins than normal, but it wasn't too far away and didn't look muddy or desperate. They found number 14 and parked in front of it. When Dimple opened the door, he said, "There's a fridge," and went to collect some beers. They carried their food and bags inside. Ruthie looked around and said, "This is a bit strange, but it's still fun. The bed's better than the one at the pub at least. And the outlook." And he was right. Through their front window, they could see a great steely expanse of water, and Ruthie could almost pretend it was the ocean. It was mid-afternoon, and after they unpacked, they made love. Not as successfully as either of them would have liked, but it still felt like a luxury they could afford. They walked along the sandy edge of the lake, managing to appropriate some of the floating introspection a beach walk might have given them. It was flat and open in the section they were in, and there were no trees close to the water. In the distance, a man and a woman appeared, walking towards them, their shoes in their hands. "Turn back or say hello?" Dimple asked. "Say hello. If we don't like the look of them, we keep clear." The couple approached. They were both tall, slim and grey-haired. They were chatting happily, laughing at each other's comments. When they got close, the man said, "Hello." "Hi," Dimple said. "Are you staying in the cabins?" "Yes." "Oh, good. We were hoping there might be some other guests. I'm Paul, and this is my sister, Janice." They nodded their hellos. They were attractive people, Ruthie thought, fit-looking, and their skin had the unweathered youth of city people. Only the colour of their hair gave away their age. "So, where do you guys hail from?" Paul asked. "We're from Stony Creek, near Freshwell," Ruthie said. "I know where that is," Janice said confidently. "We're from the city. We thought we'd take some time out in the country. We've heard so much about the drought, and everyone's been saying city people should visit the country and spend some money in the small towns. So we thought, why not?" Dimple said, "Good on you. Brother and sister travelling together. That's good too." "Yes, it's nice." Janice turned to her brother and put a hand on his shoulder. "I lost my wife a few months ago. Janice has been working hard to get me out of myself. I think it's working." Paul smiled, not quite ruefully. He looked like a man who thought losing your partner was something you had to expect, a painful part of a rich life. "What are you two up to?" "We needed to get off the farm for a couple of days. This was just a random choice. Seems okay, though." Dimple said it quickly before Ruthie could give any other explanation. He looked out across the water. "I'm glad you could get away. It must be very tough. The walk up this way is nice." Paul pointed behind him. "Calming, which I like, but you might be wanting something else." "Calming is good," Ruthie said, making to move past them. The other couple stepped forward together, and Janice said, "Nice to meet you." "You too," said Dimple. "We'll be having a drink out the front of my cabin later on if you want to join us, but, you know." "No pressure." He put his hands up and spread them to illustrate. "Okay, thanks," Ruthie said, careful not to commit. The couples walked away from each other, and when it seemed safe, Dimple asked, "Do you want to have a drink with them?" "They seem nice. Do you want to?" "Guess so. Could be a long night for me if you fall asleep early." Pelicans landed in the water close by, and the sun was bright off the water around them. Dimple and Ruthie walked without talking. Before they turned back, they waded out into the water up to their knees. "Makes me feel like a pom on holidays," Dimple said. "Should be wearing a sleeveless pullover with a knotted hanky on my head." Ruthie leant down, dipped her fingers in the water, and scooped out a splash of water at him. He hardly moved. "That's a very dangerous move, Mrs. Travers." He squinted his eyes at her. "You could find yourself very wet." She was already running away from him, picking her feet up out of the water and squealing. He skimmed a hand across the water, sending a spray towards her that fell short. Then he gave chase, splashing at her at every second step. He caught her near where the grass was supposed to start, scooped her up like a child, and ran back to the water, where he held her low down and pretended to be about to drop her. "Now say you're sorry." He dipped her head close to the water, but she was laughing too much to reply with anything but a strangled version of the word. He spun her so she was the right way up, and then placed her feet first into the water. She leant against him, her laughter reduced to groans. Then she stood on her own, straightening her top, and walked a few steps away. He followed, knowing that if she reverted to the girl she was 30 years ago, the next thing she would do was splash him again. She did not let him down. The water ran down his face as she sprinted away, and he half-heartedly gave chase. When they were both at the water's edge, he picked up his speed, and she did her best to stay ahead of him. But the rules of the game said he was always faster and stronger, and it was important that he show her this was still the way it was. He caught her quickly, held her tightly, and kissed her on the cheek against her will. Then he guided her towards their cabin. Dimple used the ablution block first, in case there were pitfalls that needed to be managed. He told Ruthie they were clean and functional, with enough hot water and water pressure in the shower to make it a pleasant experience. Spiders and other insects were at a minimum. Ruthie walked up to the block with her towel and her toiletry bag. The non-en-suites were beginning to make her miss her bathrooms at home. But Dimple was right. The shower and toilets were clean enough. She had a long shower, as if that might compensate for the distance from her cabin. She felt for the lump that was creating so much change. On the radio, there'd been a science story about cancer cells being able to regenerate endlessly, in effect cheating death. It made her hope for surgery. To cut something out of her body so she might cheat death, at least for a little while. In the sunlight that streamed through a high window, she examined the rest of her body. The cut on her forearm where the barbed wire had let go and whipped across her skin when she was helping Dimple fence the hill paddock. The marks and strains from carrying 2 boys. The slice on the back of her leg where she fell off a horse onto an unforgiving fence post. The faded scar of a melanoma long removed. She walked out in a robe with her hair in a towel, repeating random words of solace to herself, and almost walked into Paul. He looked a little startled, holding his own towel and toiletry bag. "Oops," she said. "Sorry. The glory of shared bathrooms, eh?" "I'm not complaining," he said, looking her up and down, and then proceeded to the men's showers. Ruthie strolled back to her cabin, thinking about his comment. It was vaguely sleazy, but it gave her a little lift. It was good to be appreciated, even if it was only for how you looked. If treatment does not occur, breast cancer will usually spread to other areas of the body. Most days, she didn't have to think too much about how she looked. She took care of herself, and didn't like Dimple to see her messy or too dowdy, but she never put in much effort. She knew he liked the look of her, but never expected him to appreciate her on a normal workday. It was hard enough to stay clean and not too sweaty. Tonight, she thought she might make an effort. Dimple took a beer and sat outside on a deck chair while she dressed. He felt at peace, despite all the worrying things that awaited him. Like Ruthie, he had managed to put them out of his mind. It was an essential skill of existence. And why not be at peace? The drought, the thing that he hated, that he could no longer see as a challenge as he had as a younger man, that he wished away every day by paying homage to forecasts, was actually doing him a good turn. he had his wife's word that she would not leave him while the drought continued. Bring on the dry, he thought, slugging down his cold beer. When Ruthie was ready, he grabbed some alcohol from the little fridge and told her how beautiful she looked. The order was unintentional. They walked across to Paul's in the dusk, like they were wedding guests or soiree attendees. Ruthie had even gone for some lipstick, and Dimple held her hand. They could hear Paul and Janice's genuine laughter in the half-dark. "Here they are," Janice said as they came into the circle of their light. Paul stood and asked if he could get them a drink, but Dimple waved the wine bottle and a couple of beers he was carrying. The four of them sat in the light of Paul's room in an outdoor bulb. "How was your walk?" Janice asked, which started them on an easy conversation about small things, the cabins, the place they were in, the time it took to get there and where they might go next. Janice had never spent much time out of the cities and knew very little about farming, so Dimple and Ruthie answered her simple questions and in return received expressions of amazement and a sense they were extraordinary. When Ruthie asked him what he did, Paul said he'd been an archaeologist but had retired after his wife's death and kept his life's work as a special interest. He'd specialised in indigenous archaeology, focusing on evidence of the first arrivals. It had meant years spent camping near cave sites and being based in small towns and isolated communities. "I didn't see my wife as much as I would have liked. She got sick of the rough digs pretty quickly." He talked about the remarkable things he'd seen and the magic he'd uncovered. He appeared reluctant to talk about himself, but Ruthie prodded him forward. "We've never given the First Peoples their due, as far as I'm concerned," he said. "But it's worse than that. We deliberately erased their achievements from our histories. We know so little about them, the complexity of their farming methods, their trade interactions, their food, the way they treated the land." "They didn't do much farming, did they? It was hunter-gatherer most of the time, as far as I know." Dimple was briefly engaged by the possibility that he might catch Paul out. "That's what we're supposed to think. There's a fair bit of evidence that's not true. Fish traps and grain stooks, but it's not actually my field, so I wouldn't want to pretend I'm an expert. But the plain to the west of here that you came across before you came up into the hills? The first explorers said it was a treeless plain, a natural phenomenon that precluded trees. But there's now forensic evidence that the local indigenes burnt it, maybe for centuries, hundreds of centuries, to attract kangaroos and other grass-eaters. They would choose areas to progressively burn the tussock grass, which would result in fresh shoots that would entice kangaroos in numbers into confined areas where hunters could ambush them." "We live on the edge of a plain like that," Dimple said. "Might be the same circumstance," Janice said helpfully. After that, Dimple tired of Paul's anecdotes. He was a good storyteller of smart stories, but there was only so much Dimple could take of the rich selflessness of his life, especially as Ruthie was entranced by him. Dimple tried to talk to Janice, questioning her about her life and her work, but it was obvious she was more interested in what her brother had to say. When he asked carefully about a partner and children, she told him she had neither, and went back to listening to Paul. Dimple had already had several beers, but he opened another one because it seemed the only consolation available. The women were giggling at every urbane suggestion from Paul. Dimple tried to peer out into the dark, but the light above them stopped him from seeing anything further than their group of chairs. He noticed he wasn't the only one drinking a lot. The bottle of wine he'd brought was empty, and Paul had produced 2 more and refilled Ruthie's glass. Ruthie was commending it. "Yes, it's a favourite of mine," Paul said. "Pretty pricey, though. Life's too short to drink crap wine, you know." Ruthie apparently did know. Ruthie was also fascinated by archaeology and Aboriginal history, which was news to Dimple. Janice suggested some music, and Ruthie enthusiastically agreed. When they'd selected a song, the 2 women got Paul to his feet, and the 3 of them began to dance. It took some minutes before Ruthie tried to encourage Dimple to join in. When he declined, she didn't bother again. She danced with Paul, who smiled and shrugged at Dimple, but took Ruthie in his arms. Dimple thought he might hit the other man, but he also knew from years of drinking that if he did, he would be ashamed in the morning. He wanted to go back to his cabin, but he realized he couldn't trust his wife. After all she'd said, and the way she was responding to this sweet talker, Dimple couldn't convince himself that she wouldn't do something that would hurt him. So he sat and waited, slowly drinking his beer and good-naturedly enduring their occasional jeers. He tried not to watch them, because it seemed voyeuristic, but he felt stupid. At one point, Ruthie clumsily took something from Paul, and Dimple looked away as if they had a right to privacy. Eventually, the three of them ran out of party spirit. Ruthie said good night effusively, and Dimple guided her back to their cabin. All the way she exclaimed how much fun she'd had, how amazing Paul was, and what a stick in the mud Dimple turned out to be. When they were in bed, and Ruthie was immediately asleep, Dimple lay on his back, telling himself to be calm, but feeling that a strong thing inside him might be breaking. He had spent some time lying there, unable to sleep, when Ruthie got out of bed. She walked towards the door, saying, "Paul, Paul," under her breath. Then she took her clothes off and stood naked, facing the door. "Paul." Ruthie was not someone to walk around without her clothes on, even when she was a newlywed. So it was a shock for him to see her nude in the weak light. Her neck rose elegantly out of her smooth shoulders, and then was hidden by her soft, dark hair. Her buttocks were still firm, and her back lean. The sight was as exciting as it was awful. He felt like he was witness to her infidelity. She was naked for Paul. Dimple got up and directed her back to bed without waking her. If he was a crying man, he would have cried. In the morning, Ruthie pulled the sheet up around herself and said in a scratchy voice, "Didn't I put my pajamas on last night? I was sure I did." "You had a dream. You got up and took them off. I put you back to bed." "Oh." Ruthie now recalled the dream and the way it made her feel. It was a bad idea to let Dimple know. "I can't remember anything." "I think it's probably the sort of dream you would remember. Sexy by the look of it. And I can tell you it didn't include me." Ruthie felt a flush go up the skin of her neck, so she turned away from him and got out of bed. "Didn't include you? Like last night, because you couldn't be bothered to be included? Sounds to me like you're a bit jealous, Dimple. Like you think I was going to get it on with Paul." "It certainly looked like that." "Don't be so crude. We were just having fun, dancing and drinking like people do. Pity you couldn't let go a little more." Dimple said nothing. He'd never known an unfaithful wife, but he knew a cornered one, which meant there was no point making a case. It would end in incoherent shouting and no winners. Ruthie gathered her things to go to the shower block. Dimple had to stop himself thinking he should go with her to prevent a chance meeting with Paul. When she shut the door behind her, he sat on the edge of the bed and took 3 deep breaths. He didn't know who Ruthie had turned into, but he knew if she was going to stay this way, he couldn't live with it. He was heartsick in a way he hadn't been for years. The trip home would be long and lonely, and there was nothing he could do about it. The thought of the farm and its memorized horizon, the dogs and those blessed cows offered some comfort. Ruthie walked with her head down, trying to ignore the pounding and the dry eucalyptus leaves rustling underfoot. The previous night was not perfectly clear to her, but what she could bring back seemed mostly above board. She was pretty sure she hadn't kissed Paul or anything, but she might have gripped him a little too tightly. It was possible he had got a wrong impression from her, but how wrong was it? Embarrassment wasn't the only thing she felt. There was something delicious about it, being close to Paul and imagining what that could lead to, as well as giving Dimple a little pain. She had not realized she wanted to hurt Dimple, if only a bit. But apparently she did, and there was pleasure in it. No avoiding that. As she got into the shower, she laughed. Dimple would be all at sea. His dependable, loyal, no-nonsense wife had gone missing. In her place was a free spirit and a good-time girl. Right now, it felt like this was the real her, the new her. But it wasn't. It was a weird her, a Ruthie who wanted to feel things and see things, as well as hurt her lifelong partner because he had what he wanted from life. He could walk down the paddock whistling badly with those dogs around him for another 1,000 years and not think of a thing to complain about. He was where he wanted to be, with the person he wanted to be with. Without ever thinking about it or planning a thing, she had decided to put a spanner in his works. He could be in the right place, but he couldn't have the right person. Not without a significant effort, anyway. Before she left the block, she stuck her head out the doorway to see if anyone was around. If Paul turned up, she would have no idea how to behave, especially as she was still holding the sensation that she had been naked and willing in front of him last night. But Paul wasn't around. It was still early, so he and Janice were probably asleep. And then, as she walked briskly to the cabin, a forgotten part of the night came back to her. She had his phone number. She had asked him for it, with whispers and sign language when Dimple wasn't looking. Paul had scribbled it on a piece of paper. It was in last night's clothes. That was the wrong thing to do. Nobody could think otherwise. Paul must have been shocked, but since he gave her his number, right under her husband's nose, he must have been hopeful too. He would call her sometime, no doubt. Ruthie clutched her robe to her throat. Freedom was one thing, but betrayal was something else. Betrayal was underhanded and unfair. In the last 2 days, she had told Dimple everything, including the possibility that she would want the proceeds from her half of the farm when the drought was over. That was pretty brutal, but it was honest. Asking a man for his number was the action of a dishonest person. She scurried behind a large, smooth-skinned, lemon-scented gum and threw up. As she dressed, she went through her clothes from the night before, searching for the scrap of paper. When she found it, she put it in the pocket of the pants she was wearing. She could not let go of it just yet. She was too hungover to ask herself why. Dimple packed the car, sat sullenly in the driver's seat and waited. He had not gone up to Paul or Janice to say goodbye, and he had no intention of doing so. They were making their way out of the lake area when Dimple's phone rang. He stopped the car before they got to the main road and answered the call. "Mr. Travers, it's Ken Lidcombe from Lidcombe and Swain, Stock and Station and Real Estate in Barraga. Mr. Oliver asked me to give you a call in regard to the purchase of your farm." "It's not actually on the market at the moment." He didn't look at Ruthie. "Yes, Mr. Oliver said that, but he said you and he had had discussions about a possible purchase down the track?" "Only in a very preliminary way. Certain things need to happen before we even start to consider an offer." "I understand that, and I can assure you that Mr. Oliver is fine with it. However, we handle all Mr. Oliver's land purchases, and he often works on a long lead time. So I would like your permission to do some title searches and ask you to provide us with the details of your farm. Plot numbers, a precise size, rates assessment number, rainfall records, water points, crop and yield histories, pest and noxious weed risk, that sort of thing." "I won't give you permission, and I'm not ready to provide you with the other information just yet. I'll call you back if that's okay. When the conversation was finished, he put the phone away and said, "Wally Oliver's agent." I heard. He swung the car out onto the road and did not talk until they stopped for coffee at a fast food place. Ruthie ordered something salty and greasy to help her deal with the queasiness she was still feeling from the drink. Then they moved further up the road to do some grocery shopping because they weren't sure when they would next be in town. Ruthie really didn't want to do any of it. Back on the road, Dimple said, "When we get home, you need to get onto this cancer stuff. See the doctor, book the surgery and the treatments or whatever you need as soon as possible." "I plan to do just that." "So we get you right again. And when you are well, we sit down and work out whether I ring Wally's agent and tell him to do his best." "You think the drought will be over by then?" Making light of his proposal was worth a try. "I can't wait for that. I'm not going through last night again. I'm not standing by in this relationship while you work out how to spread your wings." Ruthie had her hand in her pocket and could feel the scrap of paper with Paul's number scrunched up tightly. She had not expected this. She wanted to move at her own pace, not by Dimple's demand. "I think you're being a bit dramatic." Her intention was to cast doubt, let him think he had read the situation wrongly and was now overreacting, then appeal to his reasonable nature, things she had learnt at her mother's knee. "I think you're treating me like shit." "It was just a bit of fun. I probably overdid it, and I'm sorry about that. But we've been under so much pressure for so long, it was great to let go a bit. You can see that, can't you?" "I can see it, but I'm not prepared to share you with the world. Not like that, anyway. If you want to sleep with other people, you should do it as a single woman." She was going to say she didn't want to sleep with anyone else, which was almost true. "Can we just calm down? I didn't sleep with anyone or even kiss anyone. I mean, you were with me the whole time. You're being a bit ridiculous, don't you think?" "You got his phone number. I was 10 feet away. Did you think I didn't notice?" Then the words wouldn't come. How could she have thought that Dimple didn't see what she had done? How ridiculous her secret sign language must have looked. In her mind, Dimple had been on the other side of a very large, covered-in area. But she was just drunk, and had been right there in front of him. Paul must have been intoxicated too, or otherwise he would not have allowed her to go on with it. The best thing to do was weep and apologize. Instead, she calmed herself and said, "It wasn't a secret. I just swapped numbers with him. I thought maybe they could come and visit. He was such a fascinating man. We could do with a bit more intellectual stimulation in our lives." It was the least believable lie she could remember delivering. "Geez, Ruthie." Dimple stopped responding because he knew he couldn't win battles of words. An argument would only supply her with ammunition, because it would lead him into saying things that he didn't mean to say, that he didn't actually feel. They crossed a sloping rise into the valley that would eventually take them to their place. Dimple looked out over the flat farming country where there should have been green crops. The first surveyors had said there had never been trees on the wide stretches between the small sandy hills. "Wouldn't grow trees because of the deep cracking soil," they said. "Couldn't grow trees because of the wind," he said. "You can spend your whole life standing on bones and not even know it." "What?" Ruthie asked. "Nothing," Dimple said. He wondered what else he persisted in hanging on to that was obviously untrue. That his wife loved him? That she had ever thought of him as anything other than a responsibility or an inescapable commitment? "I don't care about the past anymore," Ruthie said in the same unrelated way. "I don't think what has happened is important. What matters is what will happen and what we do about it." "What?" "Nothing." Now, suddenly, she was thinking about Finny. If they sold the place, he would be the one who was disappointed. Jay enjoyed the farm and liked to help out, but Finney was the farmer. He always had difficult questions for Dimple on the management decisions that had been made. When he was a boy, no matter what terrible job Dimple had lined up, Finney wanted to be there. The fact that Finney was working in finance had more to do with who he was than where he wanted to be. The country still wasn't a great place for a young gay man. It was nowhere near as bad as it used to be, but Finney would still be an outsider. There would still be sniggering jokes. She knew that her son would be able to handle it when he got a bit older and was more accepting of himself. It was just too early. So now she might take the farm away from him before he had a chance. But she was contradicting herself. Hadn't she told Dimple they could buy another, better place with the money? And even if he only had half the money, he could buy somewhere pretty good. So she didn't have to be Finney's keeper. Couldn't be any more, although the desire in her to do so was strong. He was apart from them now, an adult. They'd done all they could. She was looking after herself now. She'd decided that. She switched the radio on, and a news report mentioned how a community of super-rich people had hired private firefighters and water bombers to protect them from a bushfire. They had survived intact. The local people, who relied on the fire brigades and volunteer bushfire fighters, had lost heavily. Ruthie turned the radio off. Even though it had only been 2 days, the country was drier than Dimple had allowed himself to remember. The what-ifs began to spike in his head. What if it didn't rain for another 2 months, 4 months, 6 months, a year? Where would they be then? Cursing themselves for not having sold when they could? Their farm and their marriage both deserts? Ruthie was catching quick glimpses of him. She couldn't tell if his face was showing pain or confusion. She almost reached out to him to say, "Turn around. If we go back and cross that ramp, we'll never come out the same. Someone can pick up the dogs for us. We've got money to live on. We can rent a quiet house at the beach and plan the rest of our lives." But she didn't say anything. She sat in her seat, straight-backed, preparing herself to return. Chapter 8. It felt like they had been away for some time, but the garden and the house told them they hadn't. The lawn had hardly grown, no plants had died, the house was not musty. Dimple could see the cows down near the hayshed, and they didn't call out or come to the fence on the arrival of Dimple's vehicle, which meant they were neither hungry nor thirsty. After he and Ruthie had taken their things inside, he went in the ute to check on the cows, the dogs, the chooks, the water and the fences. He did not ask Ruthie if she would like to come with him, which he usually would have. When he let the dogs go, they ran around as if pleasure was their performance art. He threaded his way through the cows, making sure each of them could get up and that every calf looked fed. They were unperturbed by him. Hungry cattle were never unperturbed. He reminded himself to thank Barney and offer to look after his place again. In one sense, it had been a good getaway. In all the others, it hadn't been. Ruthie checked her garden. The garden beds and the lawn, and the young trees that demanded so much attention, appeared to have hardly noticed she'd been gone. She accepted that when the summer temperatures came, which would be soon, they would suffer if she was away for even 1 day. But she also knew she'd been away and returned a different person. How was that possible? And when she'd said she didn't care about history, did she mean it? It was too late to ring the doctor. She still had 1 more night to ignore the future. But given the mood Dimple was in, it was going to be a glum one. He seemed suddenly intrigued by the Aboriginal thing. It fascinated her too, especially after the encounters with Wally and Paul, but she had let it go quickly. In fact, Paul's stories hooked her because of him, not so much because of the material. It was an awful thing to admit, but somewhere over the past 48 hours, she had lost the ability to care about the disadvantaged, the weak, and even the struggling farmers whose feelings she had thought she cared so much about. She got some mince out for dinner. There was time to make a quick spaghetti bolognese and a green salad to go with it. Was she stepping straight back into her old routine? Probably, but she just had to. The practical things had to be dealt with, and there was pleasure in it, so that made it all right. She heated the oil, diced and browned the onions, and began to sing tuneful mondegreens. Already the sense that she didn't want to leave was returning, as if it had snuck in through the back door to remind her this was her place. This was the real place. When Dimple eventually returned, he confirmed that everything was okay on the farm. After he'd showered and cleaned up, they sat eating their meal, watching the TV as though they cared about it. When they finished, Finny rang, and then Jay, and Ruthie took pleasure in telling them facetiously about their little holiday. Wally Oliver, stopping off with their thermos and the cabin by the lake. She did not tell them about Paul or the lump in her breast. Dimple asked what the boys had been up to, and then he and she stopped talking to each other. There had been plenty of times when they didn't talk, usually after trivial arguments. They would carefully avoid each other and only ask questions whose answers they couldn't do without. The time after Finny came out was a time without talking. After they'd discussed it so much, anything else was a rehash. But that was different. It was a failure of words, not a sign of unspeakable animosity. In the morning, as soon as the surgery was open, Ruthie rang her doctor. She was being matter-of-fact with herself, but the hand holding the phone shook. Her doctor, Karen Musgrove, did not seem to hold it against her that she had waited 2 days before calling. It put Ruthie at ease. "We need to remove the lump pronto. It will be day surgery. Once we've got it out, we can go from there. There'll be a few weeks of treatment either way." It sounded terrible, but not terrifying. "By the look of this, I think we'd better get you in tomorrow. Is that possible?" "Yes, it is. I'll get someone to ring you back with some times. It will mean you can't eat tonight." "Thanks, Karen." She said this remembering where the prep formula was and how sick it had made her feel before the last surgery. "I'm organised for surgery tomorrow," she told Dimple at lunchtime. "Great," he said, looking genuinely pleased. "Did the doctor sound concerned about it? Did she tell you anything else?" "No, she was clinical, like she had more important things to worry about." "I'll drive you in." "There's no need." "Of course there is. I'm still your husband. I'm not sending you in there on your own." "That would be nice. I've got to be there by 11 o'clock. They didn't do a lot of other talking, and he didn't ask her for a hand with the farm work. "How's 3027? She asked as he put his hat back on after lunch. "She and her calf are in good shape. We did a good job." "That's one positive thing." "It certainly is." Dimple was glad to get out of the house. It was claustrophobic now. He didn't know what to say to her except to ask her why she would leave or what she felt about having the operation. She hadn't talked about it at all, and now there didn't seem to be the space to. Discussing the state of 3027 was one of their few safe topics. The heat that the Bureau had long promised was arriving earlier each day, and now the temperature was tipping over what they used to call 100 degrees in the shade, and it was still spring. What would Christmas be like? Enduring a hot southern summer had been a badge of honour in recent years. Santa in board shorts and all the rest of it. If it got hot enough, the joke might be on the joke makers. He serviced pumps, knowing he should pull down and repair a few old submersibles, because the extra heat would mean the remaining cows would drink large volumes of water, over 40 litres each a day. Because his cattle numbers were down, there would be more than enough water, no matter what the weather decided to do. But a day without water would be a bad day, so he had to be ready for a broken or malfunctioning pump. He liked to be prepared, and now, especially, he needed to be busy. Getting things done took his mind away from the past and the future. He walked up through the cattle yards, checking gate catches as he always did, in the same way he checked fridge doors and house lights and vehicle fuel caps. His hands needed to be doing something. His world was full of things that could cause cost and disaster down the track if they weren't regularly monitored. At least, that was what he told himself. He checked the weather forecast, as he did every spare moment. The weather event that had been coming for 10 days was almost upon them and had not faded. The percentage chance of rain was very high, and the amount of rain would be worthwhile. But now came the painful bit. Would it actually turn into rain, or would it be another false prophecy? Despite his obsession with the forecast, he decided to ignore it. If it rained, it rained. If not, so be it. Brave words from the desperate, from someone who would be very, very annoyed if the rain did not eventuate. At any rate, it was worth trying to be brave. Ruthie went through her clothes, found the scrunched-up piece of paper, and flattened it out on the kitchen bench. The number was clear. She looked at it for a long time. She wanted to talk to Paul, but not for the obvious reasons. She needed to feel that the experience had been real, even if she just apologized for her behavior and left it at that. She walked around the garden to check that Dimple was nowhere nearby, then rang the number. Paul, it's Ruth Travers. We met at the... Ruthie, you rang. I am so pleased. I was worried you had decided to forget about that night. In his voice she heard his excitement and her folly. He immediately became a boyfriend from years ago that she had long since grown out of. The thrill of the possibility of talking to him had vaporized and left her grounded and serious-minded. She wanted to put the phone down, but he was saying how much fun he'd had, more than he'd had for ages, more than he'd had with anyone since his wife died. And when could they do it again? They must do it again. It didn't matter where. He would drive anywhere. I'm sorry, Paul. I only rang to say it was nice to meet you, but I hope I didn't lead you on. I had too much to drink. I was out of control. I think I've given you the wrong... Oh, that's okay. I know you're a married woman. We can still have fun, can't we? Doesn't matter if it's the four of us again. Please, don't change your mind. I have been so lonely. So dull. I'm sorry. I'm not what you need. It was a mistake. She hung up, hoping he wouldn't ring back. But he might. She would deal with that then. The phone rang again. Had he rung straight back? It was a local number. She picked it up. Hi, Mrs. Travers. It's Faith from Dr. Musgrave's surgery. How are you? Seems like there's been a bit of a mix-up with results, I'm afraid. Ruthie felt her heart thump. She found a chair and sat down. Yes? We seem to have confused your records with someone else's. It's good news. Your lump is quite clearly benign. There is no need for you to have treatment or surgery. The doctor says to keep an eye on it, and it might be worth getting it removed at a later date. Oh, that is good news. It was unbelievable news. Hard to make sense of. How could she get mixed up with someone else? Did I need to have the biopsy? No, there probably wasn't a need. We are very sorry about that. I bet you are. Ruthie felt her anger rising hot from her chest. How does the other poor woman feel? The one who's just found out her lump is cancerous. I can't talk about other patients. That's convenient for you, isn't it? We do apologise for putting you through this, Mrs. Travers. This practice prides itself on not making these sorts of mistakes. So, you see, it was a shock to us too. Poor you. We understand how upset you must be. This is an awful situation. A pause. Then, so, just to confirm, we've cancelled your surgery and I'll make an appointment for you to see the doctor next week. You can then talk about what's best for you. How about next Wednesday? Or will you muck that up too? Faith confirmed the appointment and finished the conversation by apologising again, sincerely, for any inconvenience. Ruthie melted to the floor. There was nothing wrong with her. She was not having a mastectomy. There were no cancer cells endlessly replicating in her body. She was not dying. She felt relief, but shame too for her melodramatic stupidity. The crisis that might have been the instigator of her odd behaviour was precisely nothing at all. She had acted as if she knew the date of the end of the world, when there was no such date. Christ almighty, where was that phone number? The fear of dying, or being disfigured, or of enduring endless procedures was replaced by a new fear for the future. Her fantasies of a different world, of new partners, had departed with the exit of bad news. Had everything been sacrificed? She let herself cry softly to acknowledge the good news and to release the pressure. Then she was still, with no thoughts in her head, just a heartbeat and deep, regular breaths. What had Dimple said? When you are well, we sit down and work out. He would understand. She could convince him it was simply a fear of dying that had caused her to act so out of character. He didn't look like he could be persuaded, but she had always managed to do so before. It would surely just take a little time. An idea struck her, and she stood, picked up the phone and dialed. Faith, can I speak to Dr. Musgrove? Putting you through. Ruthie asked the doctor if the mix-up was real, if she really was in the clear, and there had never been a risk. I am so sorry. The names got mixed up on the files. You were confused with another woman right from the start. I can assure you that your lump poses no threat. Ruthie walked out into her garden. When should she tell Dimple? Perhaps she should fake it for a while to give herself some time. She could go into town tomorrow and pretend to go to the doctor. Maybe she could tell him the appointment was at 2 o'clock, but leave at 11, claiming the doctor had brought the operation forward. That was a hateful idea. Not even Ruthie from the past 48 hours would have approved of that. And now, as she found herself walking down towards the sheds and the yards, thinking about winning Dimple back, she remembered the sensations that the 48 hours had brought her. She had liked it, even if it was just for a short time. Could she really give up on the way that felt? Maybe it didn't have to be either or. But Dimple would want decisions now. He thought he had taken hold of the whip handle and would be unwilling to let go. His manhood depended on it. Stupid manhood. She realized she had been on her way to talk to him. She turned around and headed back to the house. More thinking was needed. Maybe more thinking was always needed.
End of CD 4. CD 5.
Dimple moved the cows into a new paddock. There wasn't any more to eat in it than in the old one, but a change seemed like a good idea. Maybe there were viruses or bacteria lurking in the soil, and a move would evade them. And sometimes it was important to have a change for its own sake. He watched them wander out into the paddock, sniffing and searching, probably remembering when there was feed there. They walked on, lifting their heads in disappointment. He knew how they felt. He was struggling to see the good in anything. Ruthie no longer wanted to fight, for the farm or for him. The climate was stuffed and maybe in a state much worse than he could imagine. The world had been conquered by the worst kind of people, the Wally Olivers, and nothing could stop them. So why fight? Why not take the money and run? Become the sort of person who likes to talk about their overseas trips, or the size of their house, or the success of their investments. Isn't that who everyone wanted to be? Why not him? God, was that really what Ruthie wanted? He shut the gate and took Ringer and One Eye around to be fed. They were watching him today, certain they were in trouble for something they could not fathom. It didn't matter. They would forgive him anything. And hey, tomorrow was a bright new day. He rubbed his hand over One Eye's smooth head. Tomorrow's always a good day, isn't it, mate? The dog lifted a front foot and put it down, aware that something significant was going on. Wish I could agree with you. Dimple was late, which Ruthie took as evidence that he didn't want to be in the house with her. With most of the cows gone and no crops planted, there wasn't that much work to do. Not the usual load, anyway. When he'd come and cleaned up, she poured a beer into a tall glass, its glistening droplets sliding down onto the kitchen bench. She felt like a 1950s housewife. You may have a dozen important things to tell him, but the moment of his arrival is not the time. Let him talk first. Remember, his topics of conversation are more important than yours. He drank it, looking over the top of the glass at her. Thanks. Looks like it's going to rain tonight. There's a storm forecast and it's really heavy out there. Fingers crossed. She sipped at the wine. I don't have cancer. What? There was a mix-up. Mine is just a cyst-type thing. Nothing to worry about. I don't have to have surgery. Wow. That's amazing news. What happened? They got me confused with another woman who actually has a bad cancer, needs to be taken out straight away. I'm so pleased. He put his beer down and crossed the floor to hug and kiss her. Terrific. Terrific. You must be so relieved. I am. I definitely am. She had been thinking so much about his ultimatums that she had forgotten he would be excited for her. Which didn't mean anything, because people she didn't even know would be pleased for her. It made her feel good, though. Dimple reached for his beer. That certainly is worth a cheers. He touched his glass to hers and then gulped down half of his drink. She drank too, smiling at him, and then words she had not intended came out. So, now we sit down and talk about Wally's offer? Was she making a joke? She wasn't sure. His face went slack. He had not even begun to celebrate. There was something nasty about her bringing it up right now. It made him think about the things she'd said and done over the weekend. Yes, we do. And you need to tell me what you want. And even if you blindside me like this, I'm not going to let you play me. Just let me enjoy my beer tonight, if you don't mind. He turned and walked over to the TV and switched it on. She had always been straightforward with him, occasionally blunt. But now she seemed unable to control herself. Despite her fear and her thinking and her worrying, she had to scratch at the sore. She needed to push him on it, even though now she was afraid of what might result. It might not be breast cancer, but there might still be something seriously wrong with her. Some sort of pressure on the brain, a tumour maybe. She was definitely not her normal self. A screw loose, perhaps. She would be calm and as pleasant as possible, just like that 1950s housewife. And tomorrow she would, most likely, be back to normal. She took her wine and sat down on the couch. Cheers, she said, lifting her glass at him as a question. Cheers, he said flatly, dull-eyed. I'm sorry. It's been scary for me. It brought out some odd behaviour in me. But I feel like I'm not going back to the way I was. Maybe I will, but it just doesn't feel like it at the moment. So perhaps we shouldn't talk about the offer or the future for a week or so. What do you think? I think that's a good idea. I'm not sure I can go back to the way I was either. She stopped herself staring at his face and looked down at his thick legs and broad feet. It hadn't occurred to her that he might shift his ideas about the future. She did not expect change of any sort from him. What do you mean? I'm having a bit of trouble seeing the point. I like farming. I like animals and machinery. I like seeing things grow. But is that enough reason to keep farming? I think it is. She was contradicting herself. Where did that come from? If we can't afford to buy cattle, or even sheep when the drought breaks, what do we do with that part of the place? We won't earn as much money as we need to. We won't be able to make the improvements that we want to. And then we'll probably sell up to some prick like Wally Oliver anyway, but at a price that suits him and not us. He clasped two hands tightly in front. And if your heart is not in it, how can mine be? She wanted to tell him he was doing the right thing and that she would be with him, no matter what. But she couldn't, because she wasn't certain it was the truth. Only a few days ago, she would have had no problem reassuring him. But a few days ago, they wouldn't have needed the discussion. I keep asking myself, am I rejecting Wally Oliver's offer just so I can selfishly have the life I want? A life, it seems, you don't really want anymore? Am I thinking I don't want him to own the farm because he's a bad person, and I'm a good person? I actually don't know that's true. Yes, you do. You are a much better human being than he is. Am I? I'm sure he would say I'm just too weak to take advantage of the circumstances. You have to reach out for what you want and bugger the cost. He looked at her, his eyes a little bloodied, his body tired. Are you saying that's what I'm doing? Maybe. I don't know. It's probably you're right. At least you've said it. He started to say something, and then didn't. He picked up his beer and drank deeply from it. Outside, lightning lit up the western sky. It flashed on their faces, and Ruthie guessed it revealed two lost people. People who did not know what it was like to be lost. Dimple got up and went to the kitchen door and stood looking out into the sky. Several large drops hit the back path hard, like the advance party of the multitude he hoped was coming. He could feel the temperature dropping with every whack on the hard surface. The drops increased in number, and then stopped. He could hear himself breathing. The path had not been fully wetted, and was already beginning to dry. He checked his phone. It said it should be raining right now, exactly where he stood. He turned back, feeling disgust at having allowed himself to hope for something that his experience told him would not come true. Ruthie was preparing rice for dinner. I can't eat at the moment. I'm sorry. You need to eat, Dimple, even if it's something small. I'll see how I feel after a shower. He took off his clothes in the bathroom, doing his best not to think. Too much thinking. That was the problem. Ruthie would get over her doubts, and so would he. Then, before he could put his hand on the shower tap, he heard raindrops. A handful, and then more, on the corrugated iron roof. He stood still and thought, celebrate when it happens, not what you hope will happen. But the drops came in massed numbers now, banging on the roof and laughing wickedly down the gutters. He walked out the bathroom door down the corridor and outside into the rain. He stood on the lawn, feeling the biting cold of the water as it hit his skin. He knew it could stop at any second, making its effect as good as nothing. But still, it felt good, positive, and wet. Ruthie looked out the window at his white and brown body and his dripping hair and smiled. It's what city people think country people do, she thought. Dance around in the rain the first time they see it after a long dry spell. City people refused to understand that one fall never broke a drought. Neither did two. With the heat coming, it would take a lot of rain to get in front of the dry. It didn't mean you shouldn't celebrate it, though. She went and got 2 towels from the bathroom, hung them on a chair, and then pulled her dress over her head, slipped off her underwear, and put them in a neat pile on the same chair. I hope it doesn't stop before I get out there, she said to herself. But the rain was not stopping. Puddles were forming on the road, and on the slope outside the garden, a rivulet was pushing its way down the shallow gully as if the gully needed to be told this was what it was capable of. She gave a squeal and ran out into the downpour, her body immediately wet and shivering. Then she stood beside him with her hands out, her tongue licking at the rain. I hope Barney doesn't decide this is a good day to visit, she yelled. And then together they began screaming at a god that didn't exist. Come on! Send her down, Hughie! Dimple began to run around on the wet lawn, the water spurting up from under his feet. She followed him, and they screamed like children and caught each other in an embrace. Chapter 9. It rained most of the night on and off, a magic spell that made them happy in each other's company. Dimple ate well, and they snuggled in like campers saved from being washed away. In the morning, Dimple woke to the rare pleasure of a damp garden, wet roads and soggy paddocks. It's a start, he kept saying to himself. It's a start, at least. It was dangerous to be too positive, but stupid to be not positive at all. He had checked the rain gauge and walked the paddocks before Ruthie even got out of bed. The summer grasses had already sat up and pushed out little spires that couldn't possibly have grown overnight. At the back door, he could hear her making an orange juice at the bench. The squishing was louder than he expected. The sound made him feel good, because it meant this was a home, a place where people did things for each other. There was love, he guessed he meant, not just money. So, what do you think? She asked him as he came through the doorway. It's a start, he said, knowing she would know that's what he would say. We'll need another good fall at least. Depends on the heat, too. She drank from her newly made tea. A rain like this made it feel like everything was wet and would stay wet for a long time. But it was never true. Dimple sat in the office pretending to do the work, but really looking at pictures of the latest spray rigs, planting equipment and drones. All of it was out of his reach for the moment. Maybe for a long time. By mid-morning, the sun was out, hot and vengeful, lifting the moisture. In the humidity, Dimple wanted to drag the moisture back and push it into the ground, but you could only accept the weather, not make demands of it. He noticed there were Indian miners hopping around in the hay that the cows had walked over and not eaten. 2 weeks ago, there had only been 3 of the awful pest birds, the cane toad of the sky. Now there were at least 10 of them, and he didn't know how that had happened. All the birds were adults, so they hadn't reproduced. Somehow the word had gone out. Soon there would be hundreds of them. The metaphor seemed too obvious. He needed to get some shells for the 12 gauge. Dimple went to the sheds and tidied up, and then made sure the spray rig was ready to go. Even if there wasn't enough moisture to sow, there was enough to germinate weeds, and weeds stole moisture, so they had to be removed. Normally, young Rick Hatch drove the spray rig, and then the tractor at planting time, but they had put him off and promised him a job as soon as it rained properly. He'd taken a job in the mines. It was better pay, but a worse job, he'd said when Dimple saw him in the street. Rick was back in town visiting his family, and Dimple was lucky to have caught him. It would be a long time before he returned, if he ever did. There would be others, maybe not as competent or reliable, but that was the least of Dimple's worries. And anyway, it wasn't a day for worry. He needed to make the most of the break from the relentless dry weather of the drought. Ruthie faced up to the accounts that Dimple had avoided. There were the local rural supply houses that needed to be paid, one for the seed they'd bought that hadn't been planted yet, and one for the fertilizer they hadn't used. Time was running out. If they didn't plant on this rainfall, it might have to be the next. And if not then, they would have missed 2 crops, a significant part of their income. The bank manager would not be happy. There was the tax reporting to work through as well. She would have liked to be in the garden, appreciating the way the plants expressed their sudden pleasure at the rain. No amount of watering could do what rain did. But that would have to be her reward when she'd made some progress on the paperwork. At lunch the next day, Dimple said, "I'm going to go for a walk out into the cropping country this afternoon and see what moisture is there. If you want to come." The question was guarded. The rain was good, but neither of them expected it to solve all their problems. "I will." He and Ruthie drove from the sheds down across the grass paddock to the edge of their flat cropping country. They parked, got out, and walked through the gate into the fallow. The soil was sticky, with moisture in places, but most of it had dried to a soft, light consistency that made the walking a pleasure. The large cracks that had appeared in the ground had been filled by the expanding soil. Dimple carried a long metal probe over his shoulder, and Ruthie could hear him humming. A pale orange Nanking kestrel watched them from the fence line, perhaps wondering if they might disturb something edible. A mouse, a rat, a rabbit, that would be forced to show itself. Ruthie knew the paddock was around 150 hectares. Not particularly large, but it felt enormous, as if their land extended as far as the eye could see. The sight of Barney's tanks in the far corner put a stop to this fantasy. But still, they seemed to be a very long way away. When they were roughly halfway out into the paddock, Dimple stopped, took the probe from his shoulder, and pushed it into the soil. He put his foot on it and forced it in deep. Then he withdrew it, and they both looked at the results at the end of the metal rod. They wanted the moisture to have found its way down deep into the topsoil. If it had, there'd be soil stuck and smeared down the length of the rod. Dimple held it between them and rubbed his hand along it. Where it had been in contact with a part just below the surface of the soil, it was sticky for his hand's length. After that, the soil fell away, dusty and dry. They didn't look at each other. "Might be too early?" she asked. "Maybe the moisture hasn't had time to penetrate." "Maybe," he said, looking out across the paddock. "Maybe. He put the probe over his shoulder. "Come on then. Let's take our boundless optimism and head back." The sky was a beautiful blue in ways they didn't want to think about. They trudged back across the cultivation, listening to butcherbirds show off. "Do you think they'll kill the river?" "Big river?" "Yes, Wally Oliver's river." "Doesn't seem to be anyone stopping them, does there?" "Not that I've read or heard." "Do you think that's what we do, as a people? Wreck things? Wreck things to build things, temporary things that build wealth for just a few generations." "I think we've covered the same ground, haven't we?" "That's a dad joke, isn't it?" She pointed at the ground they were covering. "No, I thought I was being deep. We've crossed different territory to come to similar conclusions." "I don't know what conclusions I've come to. I always thought we were the good people, the real people. But now, when I actually pay attention, I see we're not at all. We make it our business to forget anything that doesn't agree with our good story." Dimple didn't reply. He couldn't think of a positive rejoinder. and he was aware the negative was too powerful in him. As they walked out of the farming country back onto the grazing paddocks, he noticed a bearded dragon hugging the top of a fence post. The lizard's sides were turning yellow. Dimple pointed, and when she saw it, Ruthie was delighted. Watching her looking so pleased made him think he would always like bearded dragons. He's changing colour because of the heat, isn't he? To keep cool. Fabulous. It was a thing Dimple had only recently discovered, observing it on a dragon he had nearly run over in the paddock. In that case, it was stress that had caused the colour change. He had looked it up and found that the research on this talent of the bearded dragon was relatively recent. A university down south somewhere had been running lab tests and had drawn underwhelming conclusions. For how many thousands of years would the first people have known something like this? And yet now it was discovered? Dimple and Ruthie walked back to the ute, not talking except to observe small changes in the landscape. Together, they ran the mob of cows into the yard and drafted off a small number that were poorer and appeared to be doing it tougher than the rest. They let the larger mob out of the yards into the paddock and waited for the calves of the drafted cows to return. Later that evening, when the calves were matched up, they put the little group into a small paddock that had some fresh grass and access to as much hay as they wanted. "How long are we planning to keep feeding these cows? The whole mob, I mean," Ruthie asked as they shut the gate. "As long as it takes." "What if the dry goes on for several more months?" "You know the strategy. Once you make the decision to feed, you have to stick with it. If you chop and change, you lose both ways." She did know this, but she liked to hear him say it. "There has to be a point where you cut and run, doesn't there?" They'd had this conversation many times, but she felt like having it again. "Eventually we'll run out of money and we'll have to sell them, probably into a bad market. That's a fair way off, and I guess we would make sure we sold before things got really bad, before the cows were too weak to get on a truck, that sort of thing." "When is that point, though?" "How long's a drought? You don't know until it's over. This one might last another year, another 2 years. I mean, when do we know we don't have enough money to keep them going?" He was quiet. They got into the ute together. "Maybe I'd better set a mark. When our reserves get to a certain level, the cows have to go." "Seems like a good plan." He knew Ruthie wasn't just questioning his planning. She was drawing parallels so that he might understand something. He wasn't sure what it was, and he refused to ask. She would have to spell it out for him, which he knew she would. He checked the forecast from several different sites. They agreed in an inconclusive manner. The consensus was that there was a chance of another reasonable fall in about 10 days. Dimple knew that any further than 4 days out, they were just guessing. He'd heard a weatherman admit it, but it felt better than a forecast for weeks of dry days. The long-term forecast suggested, in the vaguest way, that there was no big break coming. There would be rain every now and then, maybe even an occasional good fall, but not enough to properly turn things around. That night he said to Ruthie, "I think we ought to take the offer." "You're rushing it, Dimple. Don't do it because of me." "It's not because of you. Not all of it, anyway." "I was frightened of dying. We can work through this. I just need the opportunity to get away and do some different things, that's all. When this drought is gone, I'll be able to do that." "I don't have faith anymore. I don't believe things are going to get better. It's not worth the struggle." He was unnervingly resolute. "You're just having a low. It happens with drought. You know that. Give yourself some time. We've had some rain. Maybe it's the start of better things." She might have plucked the words from a self-help site. She had always been proud of being real, unaffected and undramatic. But now even the words sounded stolen. Dimple didn't notice he was turned in on himself. "I don't see how. They say it's getting hotter, which means we'll need more rain than we've ever had, and we seem to be getting less. We can manage our way around that. Yes, we can. But do we want to? Ruthie didn't know the answer to the question. You see, 1 year ago, you would have scolded me for being so pathetic. Being on the land is a challenge, you would have said. Rise to the challenge. But now, you say nothing. I can't imagine us living in town. You were the one pushing for it. I know. She bit at her lip. Maybe we could lease the farm out. It wouldn't provide enough income. Besides, we've got a very good offer on the table. If we're going to go, now is the time. We won't get a better deal. You sure it's genuine? No, but he says it is. Dimple paused. It had all come out more easily than he had expected, and hearing the words, he still believed it was the right thing to do. So, I want to follow up on it, find out if they're for real, and then take them up on it. I think it's a bad idea. I think it's too late to say that. You've been behind it from the beginning. I've changed my mind. So have I. You're not doing this to spite me, are you? Because of what I said? Because of the phone number? Dimple sighed. No, this is way too big for that. I love this place. I don't want to leave here. I never want to live anywhere else, but I think if we stay, I'll just be indulging myself and I'll end up sacrificing everything. I tell you what, how about you find out if they're genuine, get something in writing, then come back to me and we'll see where we stand. How about that? It might not even be real. It might be some nasty trick. I'll tell them we're keen, to see how serious they are. Don't rush anything, and don't give them the impression that we want to move quickly. All right. Agreed. Ruthie went to the bedroom and shut the door. She did not want to live anywhere else either. This was the house where the boys had grown up, where she had created a garden. This was the farm where they had done so much as a couple and as a family. How could she have thought of leaving? She folded and unfolded her hands, staring at the worn carpet. But he was right. She knew he was right. Tough decisions had to be made. You couldn't just hope they'd go away and that everything would turn out for the best. She stood and pushed her hands down by her sides. It would lead to new beginnings, and she was certain they needed that. Or was he playing some sort of game of brinkmanship, threatening to sell up in the hope that she would crumble and recant? Chapter 10. Now the farm was green everywhere. Every plant that could sprout or grow had done so, but only a little bit. There was not enough length in the grass for the large tongues and mouths of the cows to grip it. But it felt better to look out and see green. A week of summer weather would ruin that, so he knew he had to enjoy it while he could. The city media would not understand. The city would not understand. They would think the drought that was heralding climate change was over. Crisis averted. But he couldn't blame them. It was impossible to think it could be bone dry tomorrow when it was soaking today, baking hot tomorrow when it was freezing today. It seemed like it was beyond human imagination. Even he had to force himself to face it. While Ruthie was in town, Dimple went into the house and rang Ken Lidcombe, the agent from Burriga. He told Ken that he wanted to progress the deal, because he thought this made him sound like he did deals every day. Ken told him he would like to do a property inspection, and then they could talk details. Dimple replied that they could come whenever it suited them, as long as they gave him a bit of notice. After Ken had thanked him and said they would organise a date and time, Dimple said, "I'm working on the presumption that the starting point is double the price our local valuer puts on our place. If that's the offer Mr. Oliver made, then that's our guiding figure." Guiding? We have to be sure that your property is as good as Mr. Oliver has been led to believe, If everything is as it is supposed to be, then the figure will stand. After the call, Dimple wondered what Ken's words meant. But now that he had shown his intent, there was no rush. None of it mattered until there was something on paper. It seemed more likely than not, which would mean he would have enough money to buy a small farm near town and maybe live off the interest, or half the interest, depending on how things worked out with Ruthie. That way, he could keep his dogs and a handful of cows without the worry. It seemed a small, weak choice, but a pleasant one, and he couldn't think of a better alternative. But there had to be enough money. Forced by unthinking habit, he checked the weather forecast. Out of nowhere, the meteorologists had decided a big front was coming through, bringing big falls. It was still 10 days away, so he ignored it as much as he could, knowing he would be checking its progress every day, pretending to himself he wasn't taking it seriously. And so the agent came, yet another man with his name and his company's logo on his pocket. Ken Lidcombe was as clean as any man Dimple had ever seen, and as quiet and considerate as a funeral director. He stepped out of his shiny ute, shook Dimple's hand, and then looked around in a manner that suggested his mission was solemn and maybe painful. "We regret to inform you," Dimple could hear him saying, except he wasn't saying it. Dimple showed him around the property. Ken asked questions and tapped details of his answers into a tablet. He seemed impressed, noting that the farm was in good order, showing the benefits of Dimple having implemented simple innovations and practical solutions. Dimple tried to ask him personal things about his family and where he grew up, but Ken made a point of avoiding those sort of revelations. When they were done, Dimple took him up to the house, where Ruthie was waiting for them with tea and biscuits. They shot the breeze about the reach of the drought and about families and farming in a general sense. "Why is Mr. Oliver interested in our place?" Ruthie asked, refilling Lidcombe's tea. "I don't know the workings of Mr. Oliver's mind," Ken said, "but I know he's always on the market for good, safe country. I think, and I don't know this for sure, he's looking to focus on your area as part of his next agglomeration." Agglomeration? He likes to buy several properties in one area and eventually turn them into one operation. "Are you visiting other properties while you're in the area?" "For a property inspection, not this trip, but we've got some things on the boil." They finished their tea, and Lidcombe stood, thanked them, shook their hands, and placed a business card on the table. They walked him out to his car, their manners guiding them through their emotions. As they waved him off, Ruthie said, "Well, I feel dirty. How about you?" "Yeah, same. But we knew that. Doesn't make it any better." "The boys are thinking about coming home for the weekend." Ruthie said this as she helped Dimple feed out the hay. The bales were soft and difficult to handle. They'd obviously been made quickly and a little carelessly to meet what must have been a lucrative order from Dimple. But they couldn't complain. They were lucky to have it. Hay was still scarce. "Really? Both of them? This weekend?" Dimple stopped rolling out the round bales to ask. "Late Friday night." "Oh, wow. Can't wait to see them." He continued rolling. The cows were pushing in behind them, the greedier ones rushing to feed at the hay as it came out of the bale. "Me too. Jay told me out of the blue. They just decided." "You haven't told them anything about our discussions?" "No, not directly. I might have said there might be changes coming or something like that." Dimple pushed a blast of air out of his lips. "Sounds like you told them. Is that why they're coming?" "I didn't tell him. So that's not why they're coming." "When they do hear, they won't believe it." "I don't suppose they will. But if it goes ahead, they'll have to know eventually." "I'm waiting for Lidcombe to put something on paper, so there still isn't much to know." It would be good to have the boys around, Ruthie thought, even though it would only be for 2 nights. Their presence would break up the stalemate between husband and wife. It would be nice to have someone else in the house to talk to. Let's not involve them, please. It's complicated enough as it is. Jay's very perceptive, so I can't give you any guarantees. You haven't organised this? Got them up here to rally support? No. Have you? Don't be pathetic. I didn't even know they were coming. The hay had run out, so Dimple started to go back to the tractor. Ruthie stopped him. I would like to talk to the boys about this. It's important. It's the place they grew up in. One of them might want to end up here. We can't just ring them and tell them we sold it. Dimple climbed up into the tractor. I think it's a bad idea, but I know I won't be able to stop you. She was hanging clothes on the line when Jay rang to say the weekend visit was off. He had to work, and Finney had a party he couldn't miss. She covered her disappointment. They didn't get to see the boys much anymore. They had so much going on in their lives that parents didn't fit in anywhere. She consoled herself that it was probably a good thing the boys weren't around. Otherwise they would be drawn into the tussle about the farm and the future. The forecast indicated a high likelihood of wild winds, with potential downpours and a risk of flooding. This got a laugh out of Dimple. He knew they would most likely be right about the wild winds, but the downpours and flooding were fanciful. By the time the system got to him, it would just be a day and a half of gales, which was a pity, because it was the perfect time for another fall. It would be the follow-up rain that planting a crop or growing a good body of grass needed, but he couldn't raise any form of optimism that this would happen. He was resigned to the reality that it would never rain properly again. It was the best form of self-protection. If you did not hope, you could not be disappointed. His phone rang. It was Finney. Dimple moved to where he knew the signal was strongest. Hi there. Hi, Dad. What are you up to? Dimple related what he had been doing, and then described the stupidity of the forecast. You can't make it this weekend? No. Sorry, too much on. Finney told him how work was going and then said, Are you thinking about selling the place, Dad? Mum said something. Not really. I kind of worked it out. Sorry, mate. I wanted to tell you, but it's really something me and your mum have had to work out together. So it's true? We've got an offer we just have to consider. It's too good to just say, no thanks, I never plan to sell up. Sometimes you've got to face reality. I know, and I understand. I'd need to let you know that it's all right by me and Jay. He'll tell you for himself. But if somehow you didn't sell, that would be great too. You know what I mean? I know what you mean, mate. It's not set in stone yet. I'll just have to let you know how it pans out. Okay. Good luck with it. Talk soon. See you, Dad. Dimple thought about saying, love you, but it was too late. Finney was gone, back to his city life and his friends and his whatever. It must have been a difficult call to make, for Finney to let his father know he supported the sale of the family farm, but hoped it wouldn't happen, without letting either opinion come across as an attempt at influence. He didn't deserve that kind of consideration from Finney. He had spent too many years being inadequately considerate of him. It amazed and gratified him to find out that his son didn't hold a grudge. He would have understood if he did, but Finney seemed capable of overcoming the past. So, no matter how bad it got, there were things unearned to be thankful for. A bronzewing in a tree somewhere sent out one hooting note, and then another, and continued with regular insistence, giving no sense it ever planned to stop. It sounded like it had been calibrated to keep time, to remind everyone that the minutes were ticking past. He wanted to yell out and tell it to shut up, but he knew the futility of the gesture would make him feel worse. Dimple drove through the grass paddocks to see how much feed the rain had brought. The paddocks, empty of stock, had a weird end-of-days feel. Where was everybody? Kangaroos had moved in mobs to pick at the green shoots. They fed in crouched groups, hardly bothering to look up as he went past. There was only just enough growth for the fine mouths of the roos to nip at. On the edge of a gully, a wombat joined them, equally unconcerned by Dimple. He knew that was a wombat thing. He never saw them until they were ill, old, or really hungry, when they seemed to stop worrying about humans. Then you could either find them in the garden or evidence of them in parcels of square poop. He drove on, acknowledging to himself that the farm was never empty. It was just empty of his animals. Chapter 11. Mrs. Travers, it's Ken Lidcombe, Mr. Oliver's agent. Oh, hi, Ken. What can I do for you? Is your husband around? Ruthie did her best to keep the annoyance out of her voice. I'm an equal partner in this business, Mr. Lidcombe. I'm sure you can tell me whatever it is you wanted to share with my husband. Yes, of course. The line went silent. Then she guessed Mr. Lidcombe felt like he was cornered. Let's see. Mr. Oliver would like to confirm an offer to buy your property along the lines that have been discussed. Righto. Ruthie swallowed heavily. It was real. And now she wished it wasn't. But he would like to do it in person. He wishes to come to your place to sign the papers and shake on the deal. I'll let Dimple know. Thank you. Could you get him to call me, please, if that's okay? I will. Ruthie sat down and held her head in her hands. It was time to be strong. The next stage took courage. She had told herself that many times. But she did not feel very brave. She felt stupid. When she told Dimple the news, he gave her nothing, saying only, I'll give him a call. She listened to him talking to Ken, setting up the visit. Why did Wally want to come here? It was as good a time as any to see the place, she supposed, and there would be some triumphalism. She had no doubt about that. Perhaps she could absent herself, rather than suffer the insufferable. On Monday, mid-morning. How does that sound? Dimple was confirming with her. Fine. I'll make biscuits. She said this playfully, not feeling it. It's big money. I know. It creates a future for us. For you and for the boys. I know. Well, be happy about it then. I'll do my best. We need to think where we're going to live. We? I was hoping. Me too. Good. He left the room. The truck of hay arrived mid-afternoon. Dimple didn't dare to think how many more there would have to be and where the hay would come from. The driver was a good-natured bloke who had just driven from the other end of the state and would return there when he'd left Dimple's place. Like his fellow drivers, he made it sound like no big thing. Dimple guessed he was glad to have the work. Dimple unloaded the hay bales and placed them neatly in the shed, packed tightly, the front faces flat and square to the ground. The truck and its driver were gone as soon as Dimple had signed for the load. He walked over to the hay shed and examined the contents. At least they now had a couple of weeks of feed for the cows, no matter what the weather did. It was pretty good quality too, wheaten and green, without too many spiky heads. Once they sold up, he might not have to feed out hay, load and unload it ever again. If he didn't have the belief to keep this place going, could he really saddle up to buy another farm? It made no sense. Perhaps he would just follow Ruthie around on her adventures. He pushed the shed gate shut and laughed at himself. Trailing around after Ruthie while she spent time with girlfriends and did her best with boyfriends would have to be one of his worst ideas ever. And it had a few. But what else could he do? Work for other people? Help out friends? Take up golf? All of it seemed dreary. The only thing he wanted to do, that he could think of, was lie down. Not even sleep, Just lie down and shut his eyes, with no reason to get up. Ever. That was his ambition. In the next paddock, the cows were watching him, calling out. They had already been fed, but he thought their point was a reasonable one. How could he stack so much hay and not give them any? But the calls were half-hearted. They would move away from the fence in a minute when they realised he wasn't going to give in. When the time came to sell them, he would miss them. When you only had 70 cows, you got to know them individually. The bullies, the nervy, the unflappable and the fussy. He knew the cows that were always at the gate, ready to run through it whenever they got the chance. What they thought they were running to, he didn't know, but you had to respect an optimist. Optimism was all you ever really had. It was a truth of farming. You had to get up in the morning knowing that, someday soon, things would be better. He felt like he had lost that ability, which was a little like losing the ability to live. Ruthie trawled through real estate sites. She checked locations in towns, as well as in the big city, that she thought might be nice to live in. She decided that the best approach would be to rent a house in Freshwell until they worked out what they both wanted to do. Then they could choose the farm and the houses that they liked, however that worked out. There was a small local house on the hill, Federation style, that was available for rent. It looked neat and well cared for, and had a nice little garden. She put in a declaration of interest, and she got a response from the website that someone would contact her soon. Luckily, in Freshwell, not having a rental history didn't matter. But none of it seemed real. She and Dimple living in town only a few metres from other families, being able to walk to the shops in the main street, not having anywhere to go to get away from people, receiving visits from Finney and Jay in town. It was a dream. A very bad one. Chapter 12. Monday was clear and warm, but it was still spring, so Ruthie did not turn on the air conditioner for their guests. They arrived in the largest four-wheel drive Ruthie had ever seen, a king cab that was more like a small truck. Dimple went out to greet them. They got out of their monster machine, excited, like men attending the picnic races. The trip had obviously been fun. There were 3 of them, Wally, Ken, and a young man from Ken's office. Everyone shook hands, and Wally bent to kiss Ruthie on the cheek. She did not stop or evade him, and was quickly ashamed of herself. "Nice-looking place," Wally said, standing back, reminding them it was his first visit. "And green, at least. I love these little farms." Ruthie had to stop thoughts of jamming her heel down on top of his cowboy-booted foot. They went into the kitchen and took seats around the bench while Ruthie served tea, coffee and biscuits. The friendly ceremony went against her instincts, but she had agreed with Dimple that it was a big occasion with a lot of money involved, so they had to do their best to make sure everything went smoothly and amicably. After all, they had accepted the offer, so they could hardly carry on like they were unhappy with what was happening, even if that was what they felt. Ken had a briefcase that Ruthie thought looked far too expensive for a rural real estate agent, but everything to do with Wally was expensive. She saw that he wore a top-of-the-range brand-name watch. She knew his cheeks were puffed out as a result of his unending good life. How did his wife feel about him? And those Asian women? Now he was smiling and laughing and telling jolly anecdotes in their kitchen like an old friend. What had she and Dimple done? It wasn't too late. She could tell them the deal was off, call Dimple out of the room and make him see how wrong they were. But he knew. Dimple knew exactly what he was doing and why, and she had agreed with him. There was nothing wrong with wanting more from life, demanding more, and this was the price. She could endure it. In a couple of hours it would be done, and Wally would be gone, and they could begin the process of moving on. She squeezed the edge of the bench top tightly with both hands. Wally was looking at the ceiling, saying casually, "We'd probably knock this house down and build something a bit larger, a little more generous, but that said, I don't worry about houses much." Ruthie gripped the bench. "We'll put a young manager on down here, and he can run the farms we put together. He'll have a lot of infrastructure to get built in a fairly short time." Wally grimaced to show the weight of the amount of work to be done. "We'll be spending a lot of cash, so it will be good for the local communities." Dimple didn't need anyone to tell him what was going on. He had expected it. It might as well have been in the contract. He had taken time to think it through. Whatever they did, he would be ready for it, and nothing would make him crack. Again, he set his jaw and made a pleasant face. "I mean, there's nothing wrong with the things you've got here," Wally went on. "But from what Ken says, it's not laid out in the most efficient way. We'll move fence lines, roads and silos, and of course, we'll increase the size of those silos tenfold, so everything is streamlined. The sort of thing you wouldn't have been able to do on your budget. This is what I mean by having sufficient capital to make the right business decisions. By the time we're finished here, this place will be twice as profitable." "Perhaps we'd better do the paperwork," Ken suggested. Was he aware how obnoxious his client was, Ruthie wondered? Probably not. If you worked with someone like Wally, you had to accept everything about him, or at least tell yourself you did. "Okay, let's make it official," Dimple said, and gave no hint that there was anything else in the world he would rather do. Ken opened his briefcase and took out some contracts. Then he proceeded to go through the details. Ruthie listened to the amount they were offering and knew again that a gigantic sum like this could buy almost anyone. She and Dimple signed, and then Wally signed, and Ken witnessed both sets of signatures. They all shook hands again. "We'll need you to get rid of those old cows as soon as possible. I know it's not in the contract and you've got 2 months to get out, but the sooner they're gone the better. We need the grass to grow and to get some better genetics in here ASAP," Wally said. "I'll do my best," Dimple said, and Ruthie knew that meant he'd do it when he felt like it. Getting rid of the last of their cows would be very painful. "But you know, if you want to stay here for a while and work for us, we'd be happy with that. The knowledge you have of this country would be useful. Of course, we wouldn't be paying you a full wage. You're not as qualified as my men are, but—" He looked at Ken. "I'm sure we could come up with something." Ken was nodding. "I'll give it some thought," Dimple replied, not rattled. The visitors stood and thanked Ruthie for the tea and biscuits. Ken said it was nice doing business with them, and then they went out the front door, followed by Dimple. Ruthie let them go. She stayed in the kitchen. Being nice was no longer possible. She heard the ute truck leave, showing off its horsepower, and she sighed like there had been a funeral announcement. She emptied the teapot and washed the plates and cups. Dimple did not come back, and she wondered if he had gone straight back out into the paddock. She put the remaining biscuits back in the tin and sauntered down the hall to the front door, where she could see Dimple's shoulder through the gauze. He was standing on the veranda, looking out into the garden. She wondered what he was doing, still there after maybe 15 minutes. Deep in thought, perhaps. She took a few steps forward and could just make out that his shoulder might have been shaking. She walked to the door as quietly as she could. There was stifled whimpering coming from somewhere near him. She had never seen Dimple cry. It was not possible that he could be. There must be somebody else with him. But who? She pushed through the front door and out onto the veranda and stood just behind her husband. He was crying. She was sure of it. And then he realized she was there and quickly wiped his face with his sleeve and stepped down onto the lawn. "That was shit, wasn't it?" "God, he's a fuckwit," Dimple said. His head turned away from her as he strode off towards his ute. Ruthie watched him go, a disbelieving witness. She had seen him moist-eyed over Finny, and slowed up by a lump in his throat at other times, but never anything like this. She was almost embarrassed for him. She turned back to the kitchen without calling out to him. The tears began to stream down her face. But she did not sob or make a sound. Only her eyes betrayed her. Who could possibly cry when they had just become comfortable, even wealthy in some sense? It was only she and Dimple who could find a way to be unhappy about such a thing. They had traded something they loved for a more secure life and a new start. That was all they had done, and it wasn't worth crying over. It was as much a first-world problem as any you could think of. But still, her eyes weren't dry. It felt like they had given in to their own worst impulses and to the worst possible people. Sold everything and everyone out. What would Finney and Jay say? Nothing, of course. But what would they think? They would know their parents had gone mad, and now they would have to suffer for that, with money they probably wouldn't want to touch. She could not bear to think of what her mother's opinion would have been. She would have argued caustically against it, long before it got to this point. And Dimple's father? He would probably have said he expected it of them. Mercenary people did mercenary things. That would have been his point of view. And he would have been right. She walked out the back door into the garden. It was essential to keep busy. She stood amongst the swathes of flowering agapanthus and said, "It's not my garden. He said he'd knock the house down, which means the garden will be trashed. So what's the point of gardening?" There was no point, and no answer. But she knelt and began pulling out milk thistles that had taken advantage of a damp gap between the plants. There was no point, except she liked to do it, and was proud of her garden. When she and Dimple finally drove away, she needed to be able to look back and know it was as good as she could have made it. Dimple started the ute and turned up the radio. He did not want to hear his own weakness. He did not want to think about what he had just done. He already hated himself, and knew he might feel that hate for the rest of his life. Facing up to selling the cows was the first big task. When he had sold the bulk of the mob, first in small truckloads and then in big numbers, the hurt was only reduced by the fact he knew he was retaining the very best of what they owned. The genetics that he and Ruthie prized were still on the farm. The cattle he had got rid of included poor milkers and intermittent breeders, bad-tempered old cows and fence jumpers, bad doers and instant runners. At least, that's what he told himself. But now the best he could breed from the top cows his father and grandfather had bred, 3 generations worth, would be gone. If he ever owned cows again, they would be the sum of someone else's lifetime of decisions. As he drove past their paddock, only a few of the cows lifted their heads at the sound of his machine. It was a good sign. They were well fed. They were no longer desperate for the next load of hay, knowing that without his offerings there was nothing else to eat. If it didn't rain, though, their calm would not last long. They would go back to calling out to him, leaning over the fence and tracking his every move. But that wouldn't happen, because they would be sold by then, turned into hamburgers, or taken to a place where there was good grass. There were lots of things he knew he should be doing, but he just kept driving. He took the track down to the cropping country and then drove out into the middle of the paddock, across the perfect lines of soft furrows, something he would never have done before. He only ever drove over the cropping country when he had to, in a spray rig, a planting rig, or a header, and every time he kept to the tram lines to keep the compaction down. Most of the time, he never let cows into these paddocks, because protecting the soil from hard hooves was important. It mattered little now. Now he was a wealthy man, if only in money terms. As he sat in the middle of the paddock and looked out across the broad plain, he wondered about the people who had come before. Shepherds, squatters, fencers, bushrangers, selectors on unviable blocks, women with children living as isolated a life as if they had established a settlement on Mars. The idea of his own 3 generations came back to him. 3 generations that he was so deeply proud of. How many generations had existed here before his people? 2,000? 3,000? More? Almost all of them unrecognized. It dwarfed his sense of loss, but did not diminish it. He got out and walked across the soil, appreciating its softness. It was a game of winners and losers, and he thought he'd been a winner. He thought the answer was to be clinical and ruthless. You only made money when you focused solely on money, he'd heard people say. They were right. And he was right. It was what Ruthie wanted. At the start, anyway. You could not walk away from that sort of offer. Except he should have. He should have done something else. Maybe offer to buy Ruthie out over time, or borrow money so she could live that life she wanted, if she still wanted it. Or called his sons in and asked them if they saw a life for themselves on the farm, even if he couldn't for himself. He lay down on his back and spread his arms and legs out on the topsoil. The sky held nothing but blue and a few light thoughts of cloud in the east. "You fucking idiot," he said aloud. "What have you done?"
End of CD 5, CD 6.
Chapter 13. A week went past, and as far as she knew, Dimple had not talked to the boys. Neither had she. It was terrible, but she dreaded telling them, almost as much as she dreaded the day when she and Dimple drove away from the place forever. She knew Finney had talked to Dimple about selling up. He had been supportive, Dimple had said. But as they both knew, saying supportive things was the easy part. Jay would be sad, but Finney would be heartbroken. They would have to come home to say their goodbyes. The family would need a ceremony of some sort. Maybe a picnic with a bonfire in one of their favourite places. There would be community farewells too. The thought made her heart a weight in her chest. Even though they probably wouldn't be moving far away, still close enough to see their friends, she knew that once you left a community, you lost your place in people's minds. You became someone they saw on special or arranged events. She guessed you took your place in another group somewhere, but it would not be the same. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had been involved in something dirty or underhanded. It felt like they had got together to steal something or cheat someone, and that she had not been duped into doing it. She had gone in with her eyes wide open. She was as guilty as anyone of whatever crime it was they had committed. And then the euphoria of knowing she wasn't dying would return and lift her. The problems were small ones, she insisted to herself. The world was full of possibilities for a woman her age. She had spent her life ignoring opportunities for herself. It was no time to lose courage. And there would be enough money to do interesting things. Who could say no to that? Her ambitions were modest, except perhaps for a few overseas trips. She might even take Dimple. At first, she had believed the sale of the farm was a difficult and painful thing, but their only sensible option. It would have been ridiculous to reject an offer as good as Wally's, especially after all they had been through and what they still faced. To stay as they were, doing what they had been doing for so long, would have been a mistake. And change was always hard. Everybody knew that. You had to undergo a certain amount of pain to get to a better place, and so on. But her resolve was thinning. In the garden, the house, and at the chookyard, she had to argue harder and harder to keep herself believing. But deciding to sell was starting to feel like they had acted against their better natures. Over the years, they had done their best to make the business work, to provide for the boys and have a good life themselves. Profitability had always been essential to keeping the farm, but they had never put making money above everything else. Now, they had. She rang Philippa Holden, who lived a few farms away, and asked her if she would like some chooks. Philippa had a problem with her husband's dogs and their liking for chooks, so she was always on the lookout for more fowls. "Don't you want them any more?" Ruthie had thought about this question and how she would answer it. A lie would make her feel bad, but it was too soon for the truth. Nobody would be surprised by a couple selling up. The dry had gone on so long that everyone was looking at each other, wondering who would crack first. "I do, but we're going to make some changes around here, and that includes the chooks." Philippa was too nice a person to probe about the changes. "Well then, I'll take them, but if you ever want them back and if they're still alive, you can have them." Ruthie was too thankful. Philippa said her husband, George, would come over in the next few days to pick them up. Ruthie wondered how much the local grapevine knew about what was happening. It would be naive to think they didn't have an inkling, which made Philippa's gesture even kinder. While Ruthie organised to get rid of the chooks, Dimple drove around the farm, checking the water, the cows, and the landscape. Before, when things were quiet, he liked to look and think about what needed to be done, what improvements he could make, what new practices he might incorporate. Now, as he scanned the paddocks, he realised that world of imagining and the pleasure he took in it had been taken away from him. The farm would always be as it was now. The changes that were coming would be Wally's changes, and he would have nothing to do with them. All he could do was take mental pictures to be savoured in the future. Now the best he could do was try to avoid the remorse that called out to him from every paddock and every tree. It was pathetic, and he knew it. At least there were the dogs. They kept him company, watchful and not a little bit knowing. Their life was more boring than it used to be before he started selling off cows, but it was still a good life, and they had him, which was all that really mattered. He hadn't discussed with Ruthie what they were going to do with Ringer and One Eye, because they weren't going to do anything. Wherever he went, they would come with him. He was firm on that. They would hate town, but he wasn't going to live there, so it was all right. He felt empty, and even the fresh beauty of spring couldn't lift his spirits. The recent rain hadn't provided much moisture, but enough to allow the trees and grasses that were so accustomed to feast and famine to make the most of an opportunity. They sprouted and shot and grew as if they had never had it so good. He admired the optimism, but couldn't help thinking that a few hot, dry weeks would put the country back to where it was before the rain. Did nature somehow know there would never be another spring? They'd better make the most of this one. In the ute, he shook his head violently to stop himself thinking stupid things. Tough times came and went. There was no point in catastrophizing. He might not even be a farmer anymore. He might never own a farm again. It was not his worry. As he drove, a smooth-skinned cow with a robust calf calmly watched him go past. It was 3027. Her hide had almost repaired, and she looked good. Strong, if not fat. She was putting everything into her calf. He turned and drove away quickly. It was time to sell the cows. Putting it off was just going to increase the pain, and there was enough of that. When he told Ruthie he was anxious for the cattle to go, she said, "Couldn't we see if someone could take the cows on for us? Send them on adjustment somewhere? We'll have money. Someone must have feed for them." He had considered this, but had told himself it was folly. Adjustment was almost impossible to find when the whole state was in drought. How far would he have to send them to find this good feed? 500 kilometres? 1,000 kilometres? At that distance, they would just become an idea, too far away to manage properly, or maybe even care about. Okay. I'll have a ring around. At lunch and in the evenings, he rang agents and old friends, friends of friends, people he once knew, and some he'd never heard of. There were websites on the internet, but they were overloaded with people like him, desperate for a chance. The responses were all the same, apologetic, but no go. He kept at it, because at least it occupied him. He rang Russell Miller, his agent and a long-time friend again, and told him he needed the cattle to be gone within the next month. He told Ruthie at Smoko. She turned away from him and didn't say anything. She put her hands on the sink and leant on her arms. He watched as she bowed her head and let her shoulders slump. "It'll be all right," he said. "I know." She straightened. "It's suddenly real, that's all." He drank his tea, but it tasted sour. The place would soon be empty, like the relationship. He felt like a fake farmer, a fake husband, a fake man. It would be better when the cows were gone. "When do we tell the boys?" "Before the cows go, that's for sure." "I can't do this conversation right now." She wiped her hands and walked out the door into the garden. He let her go. There was no rush, but they had to be fair to Jay and Finny. He could take the coward's way and send them a message, telling them they were needed. If they rang, they would most likely get Ruthie, and then she would have to explain. He wouldn't do that. He would call them and tell them that he and their mum had important news they would only share face to face. But not yet. Russell came to look over the cattle. Dimple told him he wasn't going to feed them again. He needed to place them with good people. Russell was a messy man whose clothes never quite fitted his bulk, and hair that refused direction, even as it thinned. But he had a big heart, and Dimple was sure that heart would have been burdened with stories of woe from the many people whose cattle he had sold. A livestock agent could be as close to a counsellor as many farmers ever got. They took Dimple's ute to meander around the cattle. Every now and then Russell got out to have a better look. "You're in good shape. You've done a good job." "Thanks." "Tell me again why you're getting rid of them. I mean, the pasture seems to be coming on all right." "For how long? If we don't get follow-up, I'll be back to hand-feeding them before I know it." "Fair enough. Everyone's sick of feeding." Russell was leaning on the window, his elbow sticking out into the warm air. "But most didn't get the rain you did. A lot of people are offloading stock right now. You'd be selling in a falling market. It would be better to wait if you could." "I can't wait." Russell nodded and put too much effort into studying the cows. Dimple knew he had guessed something else was going on. Let him guess. "I'll see if anyone down south will take them. Can you give me a week or so?" "No problem." Jay rang while only Ruthie was in the house. "You guys have been very quiet. I haven't had a call or anything," he said. "Is everything all right?" "Of course. We've just been a bit busy." She moved quickly to ask him how his life was going. Jay had always been a talker, so phone conversations were easy. She was thankful for it. Listening to him, she could not believe that they had not been able to tell him or his brother. They had sold the farm, and their own children didn't even know. Their childhood home, their mental good place. "There's something we've got to tell you," she said, interrupting him. "Is it serious?" "Yes." And then her conviction deserted her. "No, actually it can wait. Just something silly." "Okay. You can tell me anyway if you want." She wondered if Jay knew, if he'd read between the lines, but he would have said. Jay was not the sort to play games. She felt sick. They were not facing what had to be faced. They were pretending it hadn't happened, which was strange, because normally they were very good at dealing with the difficult stuff together, no matter how bad. Perhaps that was it. The together thing had lost its strength. They were now two individuals finding their own way. Jay, can you come home? You and Finny? We need to see you. Sure, Mum. I'll get onto it. When she put the phone down, Dimple arrived and told her that Russell had been too busy for a cuppa, but had sent his best to her. He's going to have one last go at finding a good place for them. He asked us to give him a week or so. Okay. Jay rang. How is he? Suspicious. Did you tell him? No. Dimple's face told her how much he dreaded that call and everything that was about to happen. Everything will be all right. He laughed without humour. Of course it will. A week later, Russell told them he couldn't find a place, nor could anyone else. Dimple asked him to book 2 B double trucks for the following week to take the cows and calves to the sale yards. There might be a buyer at the sale who could give them a good home, Ruthie said, forcing the positive. Yep, but more likely they'll get their heads cut off. It hit her like a punch to the stomach. She had to grab for the back of a chair to hold herself up. She knew it was a possibility, had known it for all the cows they had sold. It shouldn't have taken her by surprise. This time, it was different. It felt like murder. Dimple didn't comfort her, and she understood. He was out of nice things to say. She watched him leave the house and wondered if they could recover. In the safety of the ute, the weather report on the radio was full of warnings about the coming system. High winds and flash flooding, hail and mini tornadoes. His only thought was a hope that the weather wouldn't stop the trucks getting out. He changed the channel to a music station. On Friday night, a small car bumped up the driveway to the house. That's Jay's car, Dimple said, after going to the window to see who would be calling in at this hour on this day. It's Jay and Finny. I asked them to come. What? I didn't know what else to do. They deserve to know. He didn't lose his temper in the way she expected he would. He simply nodded his head. They walked to the car together. Jay and Finny got out yelling their greetings like they always did, as if they had just arrived for the biggest party. They hugged in turn and stood under the dark fingers of the trees, smiling at each other. Dimple asked about the drive home, and Ruthie asked how they both were. When each had answered, Finny grinned and said, "So good to be home." Even in the half-light, their faces must have confirmed a suspicion, because Jay said, "You've sold, haven't you?" Dimple was so quiet that Ruthie started to reply, but then he said quietly, "Yeah, mate. I'm so sorry. I couldn't find a way to tell you." Finny stepped forward and put his arms around his father. "No need. We understand. We get it. We really do." "Group hug," Jay said, and dragged Ruthie into the embrace with Dimple and Finny. In Ruthie's opinion, they had the best weekend they'd had in a very long time. It was filled with food and drink and long conversations. There were some tears, mostly hers, Ruthie noted, and long walks. The boys took the bikes out during the day and went shooting one evening. They talked about selling the last of the cattle, but her sons refused sentimentality, and she was proud of them. She wished they were both farmers, bringing their partners to live nearby and raise families. Even she was permitted an idle fantasy. At Sunday lunch, when Jay and Finny were leaving to go back to the city, they all did their best not to be glum. They agreed to focus on the good things that the future could bring. That night, Dimple drank more beers than he ever used to, and passed out on the couch. Ruthie guided him to bed, and then went back to her chair and put on some music from Jay and Finny's playlist. She had just had the weekend with her beautiful sons. Her husband was sad, but he would be okay. She was healthy, There was nothing more she could wish for. And she knew that wasn't true. In the morning, Ruthie went to town. They needed food, and Dimple had asked her to pick up a hydraulic ram that had been delivered to the depot in town. But she would have gone whether she had good excuses to go or not. In the kitchen, or the garden, or the paddock, she could not clear her head. She hoped town would give her a chance to do something productive and to enjoy the meditative effect of driving. And it was essential she have a few hours away from the place and from Dimple. He was grumpy and sore-headed, and she knew that sooner or later it would be her fault. In the supermarket, she wafted around, unable to think what people like she and Dimple would eat. The practical processes of life eluded her. She put things in her shopping trolley that she couldn't imagine they would ever need. And then Innie Parker was bumping her trolley against Ruthie, saying, "Hello, stranger." Innie was a friend, a good friend, who lived on the same road out of town as Ruthie, but not close by. "Where have you been?" she was asking. "Haven't seen you forever." "Yeah, sorry, I've been a bit incommunicado. We were away. We went up north, west, to see some friends." "You must have been gone for weeks, because no one has heard from you. We were about to stage an intervention, or whatever it's called." Ruthie laughed. It was good to hear people worried about her. "I'm serious, Ruthie. In a drought like this, we have to try to keep an eye on each other. You just slipped off the radar. That could mean anything." Ruthie felt cornered. She was usually pretty good at sharing things, but not this time. She was not ready. She would have to deflect this unexpected warmth. "Yes, I know. Silly of me. I just got a bit wrapped up in everything, and there's still plenty to do, what with feeding cattle and everything." "Same for us. It's terrible, isn't it? We're all going through it, but we have to look after each other. Is Dimple going okay?" "Yeah, he's fine. Sick of it, of course, but he's in good shape. Pleased to hear it. There are people who aren't, you know. Ones you wouldn't expect." She shook her head worriedly. "Have you got time for a coffee?" "No. Sorry, I'm on a rush trip. I've got to pick up a part for Dimple that he's been waiting for. I just thought I'd grab a couple of things in here before he starts ringing, asking where I am." Innie rolled her eyes. "Oh, God, don't they go on? Ted is exactly the same. They think everything they do is of earth-shattering importance." She began to push her trolley away. "I'll catch you another time, okay? But pick up your phone, please." She waggled a finger. "I will. I definitely will." Ruthie watched Innie go, then walked smartly to the meat section, grabbed a couple of trays, wheeled round to the milk and the cheese, and headed for the checkout. She wanted to be gone by the time Innie finished her shopping. She picked up the part for Dimple and immediately made her way out of town to avoid meeting anyone else she might have to explain herself to. But Innie was right. She had been avoiding her friends. When she got the cancer diagnosis, she had not wanted the pity or the whispered concern or the melodrama, but that was behind her. Now she wasn't ready to tell anyone they had sold the place, and having conversations and not telling them was a kind of lying that she didn't want to be a part of. On the radio, they were talking about a severe weather system that was almost upon them, due to hit in the next 48 hours. Ruthie heard it, but she had stopped taking weather forecasts seriously. She knew Dimple viewed several sites and kept up a constant vigil when a system seemed near, but she couldn't be bothered with forecasts. They changed overnight, so you could go to bed with a high percentage chance of rain and wake up to not much chance at all. On the road home, she could see by the green in the paddocks and on the side of the road the places that had caught lucky storms and those that had missed out. And then she stopped looking. None of this would survive the heat that was coming. At dinner she said, "I found a place to rent in Freshwell." "Great," he said. "Trucks are booked for 10 a.m. on Thursday." They didn't speak after that. They didn't know what to say. They had been through a lot together. Good years and terrible years on the farm, as well as their worry about Finny and the million other things they fretted over as parents. But nothing like this had ever happened to them. They had never created a problem that neither could see a way through, and each thought the other was on a different side of the argument. Ruthie felt like there would be very little talking any time soon, because Dimple didn't talk when he was really stressed. He withdrew, like men did. She could normally ease him out of it, but now she had no idea how to do that. She didn't even know why. Eventually, as Dimple made tea and she sat on the couch, she said, "There's supposed to be some wild weather coming." Dimple just grunted. "Tomorrow, apparently. Going to wash us away, they say." "Well, that might be a good solution," he said, not engaging. "It's nearly time they got one right." "Yes." He took a deep breath. "But it no longer matters, does it?" "I guess not." "I thought you'd be happier." "Why?" "You're the one who wanted to leave. You're the one who wants the money to live a more interesting life." "That's not fair. I do want to live a more interesting life. Don't you? But I changed my mind about leaving here when we got back from that weekend. You know that. I had the weird idea I might be dying. Forgive me if it distorted my reasoning a bit." "It's a bit late now." "Oh, stuff you. You had the final say on this. It was about the money, remember? You achieved your aim, so you should have the courage to be decent about it, not sulking." Dimple didn't answer. He took his cup of tea and went outside. Ruthie was right, but he wasn't going to concede. He gripped his mug too tightly and sucked in a couple of deep breaths. He was cursing Ruthie, trying to think of comebacks, when he noticed that the air was different. It was humid. It hadn't been humid at any time in maybe a year. And high up, there was a distant wind. A wind that wasn't here yet. A wind that was in front of something much bigger. He walked out across the lawn. The insects stuck to his skin and his eyes and drowned in his tea. He took his phone out of his pocket to confirm the forecast, but bugs of all shape and sizes swooped on the light and almost blocked out the screen. He threw out his tea, shook his phone and went back inside. The bugs! Outside! Incredible! Yes, they've suddenly got bad in here. I don't know where they're getting in. Maybe there is something coming. The doors began to bang. Ruthie got up and walked around the windows, pushing them shut. "Can you check the back doors at the other end?" Dimple walked down to the other end of the house, listening as the wind began to shake the leaves in the trees and whisk the fallen ones along the ground. It was getting stronger and louder. It was whooshing down the side of the house, lifting a sheet of corrugated iron on the old shed. "It'll just dry things out even more," he said to a door as he wedged it shut. But by the time he'd checked the other doors and got back to the kitchen, the wind had dropped to a light breeze. With the windows shut, he and Ruthie were caught in the humid room with the sheltering insects, like bugs in a bug catcher. Then it rained. Slowly, then heavily. And stopped. The outside table had a film of water across its top, but Dimple could see in the veranda light that it was dry underneath. "I guess that's the big flood then." She heard him laugh, nasty and bitter. He went to the fridge and took out a beer. "We don't want it to rain now anyway, do we? We want Wally to have the driest season in the last 80,000 years. He twisted the top off, lifted the beer to his lips and drank in salutation. "We want the water to dry up, and the trees to give up the ghost, and the grass to blow away in the howling westerlies, and the fucking kangaroos to starve, and the parrots to drop out of the endless blue sky. That's what we want." Ruthie put the air conditioning on, so she didn't have to open the windows again and let more bugs in. It was her attempt at a distraction. Dimple was worrying her. He had gone somewhere she didn't know about, "Are you okay?" she asked. He laughed. "I'm fine. I'm just an idiot, and it's taken a bit of getting used to." Lightning flashed brightly in the south. Once, and again, and again. The lights went out. "Fuck. That'd be right. A blackout," Dimple said. Ruthie grabbed her phone for the torch and made her way to the cupboard, where she took out 3 large candles. She lit them, and the night was so still that their flames were straight, without wavering. Then she went around the room, turning off lights, appliances, the air conditioning and the TV. Dimple finished his beer and stood quietly in the dark. "I think I'll go to bed. I might read down here for a bit." "Right." When he was gone, she opened a window, fished out her e-reader, and searched for something she hadn't read. A crime novel she didn't remember came up, and she settled down to give it a chance. She ignored the insects that crawled under her collar and settled on her face. After more than 2 hours, when the power had still not come back on, Ruthie snuffed the candles out and put the e-reader away. Before she went to bed, she put her head outside to look at the sky. In the bedroom, Dimple was lying on his back, and she knew he wasn't asleep. "Didn't rain again?" he asked. "No, nothing. The sky is clear as." "Good." There was no need for him to say it. He knew that. But he couldn't let go of the idea that the worse the drought got, the more he was vindicated, and the greater was his revenge on Wally. He listened to Ruthie put on her pajamas, clean her teeth, use the toilet, and get into bed. She rolled away from him and was asleep. He lay still, hearing her soft breathing, wanting to put his hands on her, and knowing he couldn't. He forced himself to shut his eyes and relax. Chapter 14. He thought he hadn't slept, but he woke to a furious noise. Water was being dumped on the roof in quantities that might have been truckloads. The gutters were overflowing in torrents. He got up, and in the half-light saw water pooling deeply on the front lawn. At the back door, the water was brimming up to the level of the floor, threatening to seep in. He shut the door and pushed a towel up against it to seal it. The roar of the rain continued, and water started dripping from a leak in the kitchen ceiling he had never seen before. He placed a cooking pot underneath it. Another leak started over near the TV. Ruthie appeared and said, "Deluge." "Yeah, we're springing leaks. Can you help me?" He took a saucepan over near the TV, and Ruthie checked the rest of the room. Then they sat on the couch as water cascaded off the roof and covered the windows and pounded everything, as if it was their fault that the rain had not been allowed to come for such a long time. They went back to bed, and the noise continued, and Ruthie wondered if the roof might cave in under the weight. They slept lightly, waking to the continued battering of the storm. In the morning, it was raining lightly, in a parody of the night before. Dimple went out into the garden. There was a foot of water over the lawn, and every plant was either bowed and battered or snapped off. The paddocks were covered in water, or being drained by new deep gullies. The rain gauge indicated that it had over 225 millimetres overnight, almost a third of their average rainfall. The damage would be significant. He told himself it wasn't his country or his problem, but he couldn't stop hoping that the cropping country had stood up to it all right. In the kitchen, the power was back on, so he made tea and listened to the radio. It reported that the damage had been statewide, as expected. He took a tea to Ruthie, mouthing, "as expected," to himself. As he entered the bedroom, he heard the reporter say that the destruction had been particularly bad in the irrigation areas to the west of Willie. Dam walls had been destroyed, causing dams to break and adding flash flooding to the already extreme conditions. "Did you hear that?" Yes, Ruthie said, hugging her pillow and watching him. I bet Wally's copped a belting, he chuckled, and put her cup of tea down. He felt suddenly light on his feet. Wally, eh? Still, you can't wish anyone ill, can you? No? No. You want to send him a card or something? Best wishes? He laughed his light, happy laugh. Great idea. Dear Wally, hope you drowned, you bastard. Ruthie laughed with him. What's it like out there? She asked. Garden's a mess. I can't really tell about the rest of it, but I guess it's pretty bad. There would be plenty of erosion, and it looks like a few new gullies might have been cut. Nothing a dozer can't fix. Oh dear. He took his tea to the window and looked out on the sodden landscape. You know, maybe I will hang around and help out. What do you reckon? You could hunt for houses. You are incredible, Dylan Travers. One big rainfall and it's sweetness and light. Everything is A-OK. These last few weeks, I've wondered if you might be suicidal. This morning, you couldn't be happier. I know. Stupid. You can take the boy out of the farm, but you can't take the farm out of the boy. Doesn't sound right. No, but you know what I mean. He was smiling, and she was shaking her head at him. He left the room. She knew he would be cooking eggs and bacon the way he always did when he was happy, and he had the time and space to do it. No doubt he would find sausages too, and maybe try and fail to make hash browns. She forced herself up and out of bed. There might soon be a disaster inside the house as well as outside. She tentatively looked out the window at her garden. Even though a lot of the garden was waterlogged and bruised, she knew that at this time of year, with that amount of rain, the recovery would be swift. Some things would have to be replaced, but too much rain was always way better than not enough. There were already sizzling noises in the kitchen and the awful sound of Dimple humming. She came up behind him at the stove and put her arms around him. Hey, Chef. Hey. No hash browns, please. If you insist. Pancakes, then? No. Wait for when the boys are around. You were going to say home, weren't you? Uh-huh. I'm not going to think about that just yet. They cooked and ate and took their time with the food and each other. They read the papers online and had second cups of tea. Dimple pulled on his gumboots, made bad jokes about forgetting how to use them, and then walked down to the sheds. The cows still needed their hay, despite the mud and the mess the tractor would make. When he'd fed them, he trudged out to inspect the paddocks as the water gradually receded. The erosion wasn't as bad as he had feared, but there was one new sharp gully near the house. It was running water like a creek. He allowed himself to imagine that the place was still his, but, even so, he couldn't see the flooding as a real problem. Better mud than dust, he kept muttering to himself as he worked his way across the flats. Ruthie joined him in pink gumboots that he admired, and they walked down to the cropping country, their feet bogging into the mud the further they got from the house. When they looked across the plain, they could see where water had gathered, but on their own country, or what had been their country, the furrows down the contour had allowed the water to get away without tearing off too much of the topsoil. In places there were cuts and gougings, but mostly it was intact. It'll be a while before we can get onto the country, Dimple said as they walked towards home, but we, or at least they, will definitely get a crop in. He was still buoyant, but Ruthie could feel herself sinking. All the pleasure they could be enjoying they had given away. They and their country had survived a terrible drought, but they could not triumph in it. She had so badly misjudged the things that mattered to her. She took Dimple's arm, and he put his hand over hers. It'll be all right, you know. It'll be all right. The mud made them almost overbalance, and they caught each other before they could fall. They stumbled forward, leaning against each other. Less than 2 days later, Dimple was firing up the tractor and dragging the planting rig down to where he wanted to sow. He hadn't consulted Wally or Ken. He just knew they would want to put something in the ground as soon as possible. Ruthie said he had spent so many hours making sure the planter and the tractor were ready, it would have to be an act of the devil if anything broke down or went wrong. She had helped him repair the flood fences and places where sticks and mud had backed up against low fence lines, even though it was still too wet to do a proper job. It seemed their pride in keeping the place in good order had not diminished. He was pacing up and down the veranda when the phone rang. Ruthie waved him over, knowing it would probably be for him. "It's Ken Lidcombe." "Hey, Ken. How are things in your part of the world? Bit boggy?" "Pretty bad, actually. We've had a fair doing up here." "That's no good. We copped it here, but the country has stood up pretty well, I reckon." "Good for you. I was wanting to talk to you about your place." Dimple readied himself for directions. Wally would probably be sending his own men down to get on the tractor, especially as the wet probably meant there wasn't much for them to do for the time being. "Wally Oliver has had an extreme amount of damage done to his operation over a very wide area. It will put a severe dent in his cash flow, and I cannot see him being able to take on anything else except the resurrection of his own farms for a very long time." Dimple drew in a deep breath. "My wife and I signed a contract. It was witnessed. I know that, and I'm not trying to say that contract isn't valid. I just wanted to sound you out about what possibilities there might be." "Possibilities?" "Mr. Oliver has many projects, some of them financed, some of them not. My company is involved in many of them. It seems to me that it would be a good time for him to curb some of his ambitions. I was thinking that since you are still on the property, you might be open to helping him out." "You want to tear up the contract?" "Yes." "Mr. Oliver knows about this?" "Yes." "I will have to talk to my wife." "Please do, but if I could have an answer in the next couple of days, that would be greatly appreciated." Dimple found Ruthie in the office on the computer, entering figures. "You're not going to believe this." She didn't look away from the screen. He told her about the call, and she looked at him intensely, as though she thought he was lying. "It's true. That's what Ken just said on the phone." Ruthie closed her eyes and bowed her head. This wasn't possible. You couldn't tear up a contract just like that, could you? Dimple was saying excitedly, "Don't say anything. I don't want to know what you think until 6 o'clock tonight. Okay? We sit down here at 6 and we'll tell each other where we go from here. Deal?" She pushed her chair back, smacked her lips and said, "Deal." Ruthie left the accounts and went out into her garden. She knelt in amongst the salvia and the oyster plants, chopping off broken stems and pulling out the sick and the dying. But already the plants were responding to the rainwater and the warmth, and the weeds were joining in. She worked by rote, thinking only about what Dimple had said. At 6 p.m, they took seats opposite each other. Dimple clapped his hands and said, "All right, tell me what you think." Ruthie cleared her throat. "You first." "Okay. Here's how I see it. Even if we still want to sell, I don't think we've got the resources, and I don't have the will to fight them. I think forcing a mob like this to live up to their contract would be very difficult. I'm guessing they would have experience with this sort of stuff, and I don't have a clue about it. So, I reckon there's no real alternative but to tear it up." "But what do you feel? Do you want to stay or go?" "You first." "I want to stay. I want to be here. I don't want the money, but I want us to try to do a little more. Some new things, new people. Not work all the time. If we can't agree that has to happen, then we should sell up. I don't care who to or for how much. What do you think?" I don't want to go anywhere else. I'll do whatever you want so we can stay. It's not just what I want. It's what we need. Both of us. So, as soon as we get another crop, we're going on a trip. Maybe overseas, or just around the country if that's all we can manage. Agreed. And we have to include the boys in our plans. Finny might be planning to come home for good, and we don't even know because we haven't talked to him about it. I'll ring Ken back. Dimple went to the phone. It was after work hours, but he knew he would get Ken on his mobile. They talked, and Ken agreed that the cancellation would need to be done in front of independent witnesses. But he seemed very relieved. Dimple hung up. Ruthie was at his shoulder waiting for the response. We've set it up. We'll do it in town tomorrow afternoon. She hugged him and said, New start, Dimple. Yeah. New start. But there's one other call I've got to make. His eyes were sparkling, and she could almost feel her feet lifting off the ground. I'm going to ring Russell and cancel the trucks. Then they were dancing clumsily, joyously together around the room, and she was certain they were the stupidest couple anyone had ever known. Chapter 15. They met in the solicitor's office in Freshwell. Wally was not present, but the solicitor said Ken had the authority to represent him. As soon as they had signed, Ken was out the door, thanking them and disappearing. It was a lot of money, the solicitor said ruefully as he picked up the paperwork. Yes, said Ruthie. They thanked him and left, making sure the bill for his services went to Wally. In the coffee shop across the road, they drank cappuccinos and ate carrot cake. The coffee's not even that good, Ruthie said, looking out the window onto the empty street. Not good enough to leave me for? No. She took another sip. But that Burger coffee was good. An older couple walked slowly past the window. Was that something to aspire to, Ruthie wondered? She wasn't sure. Do you think Finny really wants to be a farmer? Dimple asked. I'm sure of it. But I think we should discourage him. It might be an awful business to be in. Yeah. But imagine if we made it to 4 generations. That would be pretty good. Dimple, you really are a stupid person sometimes. I was kidding. Come on, I was kidding. In the morning, Dimple and Ruthie let the cows out into fresh paddocks. They didn't need encouragement. The dogs watched from the back of the ute as the cows walked with their heads down, eating as they went. Don't you ever get sick of being a good woman? He said, as they drove back to the yards. That's not funny, she said, and you shouldn't make fun of it. No, he said. We won't. That is the end of Small Mercies. It was written by Richard Anderson and read by Nicholas Osmond. This has been an Aurora Audiobooks presentation. Further titles by this author available from Ulverscroft Limited include Boxed, Retribution. For further details of our extensive catalogue of unabridged audiobooks, please visit our website www.ulverscroft.com.